You are listening to a story on love revenge stories. Wish you an enjoyable listening experience. Just because of a few manipulative words from his mistress, Lucas Sterling abandoned his wife. Elena Gray stepped out of the car into the bone-chilling storm. But just 2 hours later, when he returned, he faced a scene that made his heart feel crushed. Not only was there overwhelming worry thinking his wife had been in an accident, but also blind jealousy when he saw her getting into a stranger's black Bentley. A wife who had once given up all her dreams for love now chose to leave to find herself again. Their 3-year marriage ended not because of betrayal, but because someone had taken for granted a woman's heart that knew how to hurt. Join us as we follow Elena's journey of rebirth, from an abandoned wife to Grace, the talented embroidery artist who would make the entire art world bow in respect. The sound of windshield wipers on the Maserati echoed steadily, struggling hopelessly to clear away the torrential rain hammering against the glass outside. The night was thick as ink, only occasionally torn apart by cold flashes of lightning that illuminated the slick, dangerously empty G15 highway. The atmosphere inside the car was suffocatingly tense. The silence stretched tight like a wire ready to snap at any moment. Elena sat curled up in the passenger seat, both hands gripping tightly the purse on her lap. She remained silent. Not because she had nothing to say, but because she knew every word she spoke now would be meaningless. Lucas's phone on the center console suddenly vibrated violently, shattering the deathly silence. The screen lit up with 2 words, "Area." Without a moment's hesitation, Lucas pressed answer and put it on speaker. His usually cold voice immediately softened by several degrees. "Area, what's wrong?" Immediately from the other end came a soft cough and Area Summers' weak, pitiful voice. "Lucas, I'm sorry for bothering you at this hour. I have such a high fever, and there's not a single pill left in the house. I'm scared." Her voice was broken, interspersed with labored breathing, as if just speaking one sentence drained all her strength. Elena unconsciously gripped her hands tighter. Here was the familiar script again. Lucas frowned, his grip on the steering wheel instinctively tightening. "Stay put at home, don't go anywhere. I'm coming right over." No, you don't need to." Area hastily refused. But her tone was full of expectation. "I don't want to bother you and your wife. You two are probably together right now. I can just take a taxi to the hospital myself." This statement was like a match thrown directly into the powder keg that had been smoldering in Lucas's chest. His eyes glanced over at Elena and his gentleness immediately vanished, replaced by coldness and disgust. "I said I'm coming over. So wait for me." He hung up without letting Area say another word. Elena took a deep breath, trying to keep her voice as calm as possible. "Lucas, it's storming heavily outside. You saw the weather forecast. They warned against driving unless absolutely necessary. The highway is very dangerous. So what?" He sneered, a smile devoid of any warmth. "To you, Area having a fever so high she's about to faint isn't necessary." "I didn't mean that," Elena explained warily. "She can call an assistant or request home medical services. You driving in this weather is gambling with your life. Elena, when will you stop this petty jealousy and selfishness?" Lucas's voice was harsh, drowning out even the sound of rain beating against the windows. "Area is all alone. She's not strong, doesn't have as many people to rely on as you do. She needs me." Elena's heart felt squeezed by an invisible hand. Needs him. In 3 years of marriage, she had never dared to bother him with small matters like being sick. Even when burning with fever in the middle of the night, she would just take medicine herself and fall asleep. Because she knew he was busy, he was tired. Because she was afraid of bothering him. "Turn the car around," she said, her voice beginning to tremble. "Let's go home. We can deal with whatever this is tomorrow. Go home." Lucas laughed loudly, a sound full of contempt. "To do what? To listen to your nagging, to see your funeral face. Elena, do you know how troublesome you are?" The car suddenly slowed with a screech of brakes piercing through the rain. Lucas swerved the Maserati into the emergency lane. He turned to look at her, his eyes sharp as knives, cold as ice. "You want to go home, don't you? Fine then." He reached over and pressed the unlock button. "Get out." Elena was stunned, unable to believe her ears. What did you say?" "I said get out of my car." Lucas nearly roared. His patience had completely evaporated. "Don't you want to go home? Go by yourself then. When you learn to think, learn some sense, then come back to that house." Tears welled up at the corners of her eyes, but Elena forced them back down. She looked deeply into the eyes of the man who had once sworn eternal love to her, the man for whom she had given up her career and passion to build their home. In those eyes, she saw nothing but cruelty and utter disgust. Her heart shattered into pieces in that moment. She said nothing more, all pleas and explanations now seemed ridiculous. She slowly unbuckled her seatbelt, her ice-cold hands trembling as she opened the car door. Cold wind carrying rain lashed violently into the car. Seeing her step outside, her slender figure shaking in the storm, a moment of hesitation flickered in Lucas's mind, but it was quickly overwhelmed by anger. He grabbed an umbrella from the back seat and threw it outside. The umbrella fell onto the wet pavement, a few steps away from where she stood, a humiliating act of charity. Don't let others see you in such a pathetic state. It's embarrassing to the Sterling family. Having said that, he didn't bother to look at her again. The car door slammed shut ruthlessly. The Maserati roared once and shot into the rain, leaving Alina alone on the vast highway, in the storm of both nature and human cruelty. She stood there motionless, tears streaming down, mixing with the icy rain flowing down her pale cheeks. She didn't pick up the umbrella. Just stood there letting the wind and rain rage around her. As if wanting to wash away all the foolishness and sacrifice she had endured over the past 3 years. Only one thought remained in her mind. It's over. It's truly over. The dark blue Maserati sped through the rain, quickly leaving Alina's small figure behind. Lucas looked in the rearview mirror as her silhouette grew smaller, and then disappeared completely in the white curtain of rain. He gripped the steering wheel tightly, jaw clenched, trying to suppress the strange uneasiness rising in his chest. Troublesome. He told himself she brought it on herself. He convinced himself that what he did was right. Elena needed a lesson. She had grown too accustomed to being pampered by him, becoming selfish and unreasonable. A little hardship would make her understand her place. Thinking this way, he stepped on the gas, the car speeding faster toward the luxury apartment complex where Arya was staying. The apartment door had barely opened when a soft, fragile figure fell into his arms. Arya was wearing a thin silk nightgown, her long hair flowing over her shoulders, her face pale, her large round eyes brimming with tears, looking utterly pitiful. "Lucas, you finally came, I was so scared." Lucas held her, feeling her feverish body, and his guilt toward Alina immediately lessened somewhat, replaced by sympathy for the woman in his arms. He lifted her up and sat her down on the sofa. "Have you taken any medicine?" he asked, his voice still carrying some harshness from the earlier argument. I just found some fever reducers and took one," Arya answered softly, her eyes sparkling as she looked at him with gratitude. "Thank you, Lucas. I don't know what I would do without you. Your wife must be so angry with you, right? It's all my fault for bothering you two at this time." She spoke with self-reproach in her tone, but every word was like pouring more oil on the fire. She cleverly reminded him of Alina's troublesome nature while elevating his importance to her. Lucas didn't respond, just silently went to the kitchen and poured her a glass of warm water. "Rest now. I'm here." Arya obediently nodded, leaning her head against his shoulder and coughing softly a few times. "Are you hungry? Let me make you some soup." "I'm sorry. There's not much in my fridge, I can only make something simple." "No need, you're sick. It's okay." She smiled weakly. "Cooking for you brings me joy." Seeing Arya's gentle, considerate manner, Lucas unconsciously compared it to Elena's stubbornness earlier. He sighed and let her go to the kitchen. Time dragged slowly by. Outside, the rain showed no signs of stopping. If anything, it was getting heavier. Thunder rolled in waves, making people uneasy. Lucas sat on the sofa, eyes on the TV screen showing some boring news program, but his mind couldn't focus. Images of Alina standing alone in the rain kept appearing in his head, her clothes soaked, hair plastered to her pale face, her eyes filled with deathly despair. The highway was already deserted at night, and now with the added storm, a truck, a drunk driver, sudden braking. Terrifying thoughts suddenly flashed through his mind, making his heart clench. He shook his head vigorously, trying to dispel those images. Nothing would happen. That was the emergency lane, she could call friends or a taxi. She wasn't a child. Arya brought out a bowl of hot soup, its mild aroma spreading through the room. "Lucas, eat a little to warm yourself up. With all this rain, be careful not to catch cold." Lucas took the spoon and tasted it. The soup was very bland, incomparable to the dishes Alina usually cooked. Even a simple bowl of soup she could make it flavorful and warming. "What's wrong? Is it not good?" Arya asked worriedly. "No, it's delicious," he lied, forcing himself to eat a few more spoonfuls before setting the bowl down. "You eat, then get some rest." He glanced at his watch. Nearly an hour had passed since he left her there, and his uneasiness grew stronger. He picked up his phone, unconsciously wanting to call her, but then put it down again. A man's pride wouldn't let him do that. He had driven her away, and calling now would be slapping himself in the face. Wouldn't it? Besides, she had probably made it home safely by now. She was surely angry, crying, but at least safe. Arya seemed to notice his distraction. She wrapped her arms around his arm, her voice wheedling. Don't worry about your wife anymore. She's so strong, she'll definitely be fine. She's just sulking a little, tomorrow everything will be back to normal. Stay with me tonight, Lucas. I'm scared to be alone. Arya's words about tomorrow everything will be back to normal not only failed to reassure Lucas but actually made him feel uncomfortable. Yes, that's how it always was. They'd argue, he'd get angry, she'd suffer in silence, and tomorrow she'd prepare breakfast as if nothing had happened. Her submission had become a habit, something taken for granted in his eyes. But her look tonight was different from usual. It no longer held hurt or pleading. It was the stillness of ashes. The clock struck another hour. Then 2 hours. 2 hours had passed in this hell of torment and worry. The news on TV suddenly switched to an urgent bulletin about the continued heavy rain and limited visibility. On the G15 Shanghai highway section, a serious chain collision has just occurred involving 3 trucks and 2 cars. Rescue operations are currently facing significant difficulties. Lucas's heart felt like it had been thrown into an ice cellar. The accident happened on the exact stretch of road he had just driven through. Unable to wait another second, he jumped up and grabbed his coat. Where are you going? Lucas. Arya panicked and grabbed his arm. Let go. Lucas pushed her hand away, his voice cold and urgent. I have to go back there. No, it's dangerous. Arya hugged him tightly, tears streaming. Don't go, I'm so scared. She's an adult, she can take care of herself. What if something happens to you if you go back there? The selfishness in her words at this moment made Lucas feel utterly disgusted. He pushed her away forcefully, his eyes showing no trace of sympathy. I'll say it again, let go. Knowing she couldn't stop him, Arya immediately changed tactics. Alright, don't be angry. I'll come with you. I'm worried about your wife too. Lucas had no time to argue. He rushed out the door, with Arya hastily throwing on a coat and running after him. In her heart, a sense of triumph mixed with a bit of fear. She wanted to witness Elena's miserable state with her own eyes. The car roared as it turned and plunged into the storm. Lucas floored the accelerator, with only one prayer left in his mind. Elena, please be safe. Lucas drove like a madman, the Maserati racing through the night, tearing through the thick curtain of rain, wipers working at full capacity, but seemingly unable to catch up with nature's fury. Inside the car, the atmosphere was even more terrifying than the storm outside. Arya sat in the passenger seat, both hands gripping the seatbelt tightly, her beautiful face now pale with fear. She dared not utter a word, only stealing glances at the man beside her. Lucas's eyes were glued to the road ahead, jaw clenched tight, veins bulging on his high forehead. His mind was chaos, regret, worry, and an invisible fear were crushing his heart. He kept reassuring himself that nothing would happen, that Elena was just sulking. Had probably called a friend for pickup or caught a taxi. But the news about the chain collision kept hammering at his mind like a sledgehammer, shattering all his self-deceptions. Lucas, slow down a bit, it's dangerous. Finally, Arya couldn't hold back and spoke up, her voice trembling. Lucas didn't respond, didn't even glance at her. He pressed the accelerator to the floor. He had only one thought: get there immediately, confirm that she was safe. In the distance ahead, the flashing red and blue lights of police and ambulance vehicles appeared like ghostly fireflies in the night. The closer they got, the more chaotic the scene became. Police had cordoned off a long stretch of road. The crashed vehicles lay scattered, deformed beyond recognition. The wail of ambulance sirens pierced the night silence. Lucas's heart sank as he was forced to stop some distance away, behind a line of other blocked vehicles. Stay in the car, he ordered Arya, his voice hoarse. Then without hesitation opened his door and rushed outside. Rain immediately poured down on him. His expensive suit was soaked instantly, but he didn't care at all. He ran toward the section of road where he had left her. Wind whistled past his ears, rain lashed his face painfully, but nothing could compare to the pain and fear tearing at his chest. Elena, he shouted hopelessly, but his calls were quickly swallowed by the storm. Arya also hurried out of the car, holding an umbrella and running after him. She called out while running, Lucas, wait for me, be careful, but Lucas seemed to hear nothing. Finally, he reached the spot. This location was right before the cordoned-off area. Fortunately not directly affected by the accident. But the scene before him made Lucas feel like lightning had struck his spine, his legs freezing in place. The wet pavement showed a long black skid mark under the weak headlights from the cars behind, several meters long. It was like a hideous scar on the road. Evidence of a horrifying collision. Nearby were scattered pieces of plastic and glass that looked like fragments from a car's headlight. But what made Lucas completely collapse was a small object lying abandoned in a puddle of rainwater. It was a beige high-heeled shoe. He recognized it. It was one of the shoes Alina had worn tonight. The shoes he had bought her for her birthday last year. She loved them, always saying they were so comfortable to walk in. Now, one shoe lay there alone, soaked, its strap broken pathetically. It was like a silent accusation of his cruelty and of a tragic ending he dared not think about. The world around Lucas seemed to freeze, the rain, wind, car horns all disappeared. In his ears remained only a buzzing sound and his heart pounding in his chest, growing weaker as if about to stop entirely. He slowly knelt down, his trembling hand reaching out to pick up the shoe. The cold of rainwater and mud seeped into his palm, but he felt it burning like a hot coal. "No, it can't be," he mumbled, his voice lost. "It can't be." Arya ran over, seeing the scene before them, she too turned pale. She covered her mouth with her hand, eyes wide with horror. But her horror was mostly from fear for herself. If something had really happened to Alina here, right after arguing with Lucas and being thrown out of his car, then she, who had indirectly caused everything, couldn't escape involvement either. "Oh my God, Lucas. How did this happen?" Her voice trembled, mixed with fake sobbing. "Your wife, she..." Lucas heard nothing. He clutched the shoe in his hand, his red eyes staring at the accident scene not far away. Ambulances were still taking people to emergency care. Could it be? Could she also be in one of those vehicles, or worse? An unprecedented despair and pain overwhelmed him. What had he done? With his own hands, he had pushed the wife who loved him into death's path. Just because of selfishness, blind trust in another woman, he had single-handedly destroyed his own happiness. His face was deathly pale, drained of all blood. Breathing became difficult as if a stone were crushing his chest. Lucas collapsed in the rain, letting tears mix with rainwater stream down his face. For the first time in his life, this powerful CEO who always held others' fates in his hands felt utterly helpless and desperate. He had lost her. The bone-chilling rain continued to fall, as if wanting to wash away all traces, but it could never erase the pain and despair carved deep in Lucas's heart. He remained kneeling there, motionless like a stone statue, still clutching the cold high-heeled shoe. Images of Alina with her gentle smile, warm eyes, and tonight's lifeless gaze kept alternating in his mind, tearing at his soul. Arya stood beside him, the umbrella in her hands shaking violently. She wanted to approach and comfort him, but seeing Lucas's stone-like appearance, she didn't dare. Things had spiraled beyond her control. She had only wanted Elena to disappear from Lucas's life, but not like this. Elena's death would become a haunting shadow over his life, and would haunt her forever too. "Lucas, let's go to the hospital and ask," she stammered, trying to offer a suggestion. Arya's words were like a key unlocking the despair imprisoning Lucas. Yes, the hospital, maybe she was just injured. As long as she was alive, no matter what price he had to pay, he would save her. He suddenly stood up, his red eyes showing a fragile glimmer of hope. Without a word, he rushed toward the police barrier around the scene. "Hey, you can't go in there, it's dangerous." A young police officer immediately stopped him. My wife. Lucas grabbed the officer's shoulder, roaring like a wounded animal. "She was here. 2 hours ago, she was standing right here. Tell me where she is now." The officer was startled by his sudden action and tried to stay calm. "Sir, this is an accident scene. Please step back so we can work. If you're looking for family, please go to the nearest police station to file a report." "No, I'm not going anywhere." Lucas had lost all reason. He held up the shoe. "This is her shoe. She was wearing a light blue dress, long hair, slender figure. Did you see her? Was she among the victims? Tell me." The panic and utter anguish in Lucas's voice moved the young officer somewhat. He looked toward an older colleague standing nearby. The senior officer approached, looked Lucas up and down, then glanced at the skid marks and debris. "You say your wife was standing in this area about 2 hours ago?" The senior officer asked in a steady voice. "Yes, exactly here." Lucas answered urgently, like a drowning man grasping at straws. The senior officer frowned, thought for a moment, then his eyes lit up. "Ah, I remember now." Each word from him hung like a suspended sentence over Lucas's head, his heart seeming to stop, waiting for the final verdict. There was indeed a girl like that. The officer continued. "She looked very pitiful, completely soaked, standing alone in the rain. We were patrolling and were about to stop and check on her, but we didn't get the chance." "Didn't get the chance for what?" Lucas demanded, unable to wait. The officer looked at him and sighed. "But she was very lucky." Right then, a black Bentley stopped. A man got out, gave her an umbrella, and invited her into the car. They had just left when this horrific accident happened behind them. A black Bentley. This information hit like a powerful electric shock, both dispersing Lucas's despair and delivering another stunning blow. She was safe. She hadn't been in an accident, she was alive. An overwhelming sense of relief crashed down, making Lucas's legs go weak, nearly collapsing. He had to lean against the roadside barrier to stay upright. He breathed heavily, trying to inhale the cold air to calm his wildly beating heart, feeling like he'd just returned from the dead. Arya, standing behind, heard everything clearly and also sighed with relief. Elena wasn't dead, that was good, everything could still be salvaged. But right after that relief, another darker, uglier emotion began rising in Lucas's heart. A black Bentley, a man, right after fighting with her husband, right after being abandoned by him, she had immediately gotten into another man's car. A man driving a Bentley. The relief at her safety was quickly replaced by unreasonable jealousy and anger. His pride was severely wounded, he felt betrayed. Clearly, he was the one at fault, the one who had pushed her into that situation. But in his mind now, all blame shifted to her. Thank you. He curtly thanked the officer and turned to leave. His face now showed not pain and despair but a chilling, dark coldness. Arya hurried after him. Lucas, your wife is okay. That's wonderful. Let's go home now, you're soaked. Lucas didn't respond. He walked straight to the car, opened the door, and got into the driver's seat. He threw Elena's wet shoe onto the passenger seat, right next to where Arya was about to sit. She looked at the shoe, then at Lucas's expression, and a bad feeling rose in her heart. Lucas gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white, with only one question echoing in his mind, a question full of fury and possession. Well done, Elena. You dared to get into another man's car. The thick night swallowed Elena's small figure like a giant monster. Rain continued to pour down, ice cold like thousands of needles piercing her skin. She no longer felt cold, or perhaps the cold outside couldn't compare to the ice freezing her heart. She walked aimlessly along the slippery emergency lane. Headlights from roaring trucks occasionally swept over her, blinding and merciless. Car horns blared accompanied by drivers' curses. In their eyes, she was probably just a lunatic, someone wanting to commit suicide. Elena smiled bitterly at herself. Suicide. She didn't have that courage, but she no longer knew how to keep living either. 3 years of youth, 3 years of sacrifice, 3 years of endurance, what had she gained? Just the words, "Get out of my car," and a figure abandoned mercilessly in the stormy night. Lucas, those 3 words had once been her entire world, her faith. She had once thought that as long as she loved enough, was gentle enough, sacrificed enough, the ice block in his heart would eventually melt. But she was wrong, that ice not only didn't melt but froze her own heart solid. A broken shoe strap made her walk with a limp. Finally, she tripped over some debris on the road and fell heavily onto the cold pavement. Dirty rainwater immediately soaked through her dress. Her palms were scraped raw against the rough road surface. But she didn't get up, she just lay there letting rainwater flow into her eyes and mouth, bitter and astringent. Perhaps this was better, let this rain wash away her foolishness, let this cold numb her pain. Suddenly, a warm but not blinding light shone down. A black Bentley stopped right beside her. Its engine purred quietly, almost inaudibly, completely different from the noisy trucks that had just passed. The car door opened, and a tall man stepped out. He wore a perfectly tailored suit and carried a large black umbrella. He approached, the umbrella shielding her from the falling rain. Elena warily looked up, the man's face was hidden in shadow, but his eyes shone bright, deep and calm like an autumn lake. Those eyes held no pity, no curiosity. Only tranquility and something sorrowful. Are you all right? His voice was deep and warm, like a gentle stream flowing through her frozen soul. Elena didn't answer, just shook her head, her strength seemed completely drained. The man said nothing more. He removed his suit jacket and gently draped it over her. The jacket still held his warmth and carried a pleasant, faint sandalwood scent. Then he bent down, one arm under her knees, one supporting her back, and easily lifted her up. Elena's body stiffened for a moment. How long had it been since anyone held her like this? Lucas had carried her too, but that was in the drunken passion of their wedding night. In possessive desire, never with such gentleness and respect. He placed her in the comfortable passenger seat of the Bentley, carefully fastened her seatbelt, then walked around to the driver's side. The car's interior immediately separated them from the stormy world outside. He turned on the heater, filling the space with warm air. Where do you live? I'll take you home, he asked, eyes still focused ahead. Home, Elena smiled bitterly inside. Did she have a home? That cold mansion. That wasn't her home, it was Lucas's home, and right now, there was probably another woman there. Seeing her silence, the man asked no more questions. He took a soft towel and a bottle of water from the glove compartment. Dry yourself off, be careful not to catch cold. Elena mechanically accepted them. When her fingers accidentally touched his hand, she felt the warmth from his palm. She lowered her head, her wet hair dripping onto his expensive suit jacket. She wanted to say thank you, but her throat was choked with emotion, unable to speak. The car rolled silently forward. The man glanced at her profile, his eyes narrowing slightly, as if trying to recognize something. After a long silence, he suddenly spoke, his voice hesitant and uncertain, yet carrying unmistakable amazement. "Excuse me, are you Grace?" Elena's body jolted violently. She snapped her head up, eyes wide, looking at the man beside her. Grace. It had been 3 years since anyone called her by that name. Since marrying Lucas, she had buried that name along with her passion, dreams, and herself. Lucas had once said, "You are Elena, Mrs. Sterling, not some nameless embroiderer." Because of those words, she had given up everything. This man, a complete stranger, why did he know that name? Seeing her reaction, the man seemed to have his answer. His eyes no longer showed doubt but regret and sincere respect. "It really is you, Grace, the embroidery artist. 3 years ago, I saw your work, mandarin ducks gazing at the moon, at an art exhibition in Suzhou. I was very impressed. But then you suddenly disappeared." The art world mourned the loss. He spoke matter-of-factly, as if recounting an old story. But every word was like a hammer breaking through the hard shell Elena had built around herself. The tears she had held back all evening could no longer be contained. They poured out, streaming hot down her face. But these weren't tears of pain from being abandoned by her husband, they were tears of self-pity, of regret for losing herself. Someone still remembered who she was. What she had once pursued wasn't meaningless after all. The man, Marcus Reed, said nothing more. He quietly handed her a box of tissues. He didn't ask why she was there or about the man who had abandoned her. He simply gave her quiet space to face her own emotions. This stranger's consideration and warmth only highlighted the cruelty and indifference of the man she had once called family. The black Bentley glided smoothly through Shanghai's brightly lit streets at night, leaving the storm behind. Instead of heading toward the noisy city center, it turned into a quiet, historic area where old-style villas hid behind ivy-covered walls. Finally, the car stopped before a large wooden gate with a calligraphy plaque reading, "Reed Art Haven." Marcus Reed hadn't taken her to a modern apartment or luxury hotel, but to his private art space, a place combining gallery, library, and creative workshop. "We're here," he said gently. "You can rest here tonight. The guest room is always kept clean." Elena had stopped crying, her eyes swollen but strangely clear and calm. She nodded, neither refusing nor thanking him. Just silently following him inside. As soon as she stepped through the gate, a completely different world opened before her. Not the ostentatious luxury of the Sterling mansion, but serene elegance. The courtyard was paved with pebbles, featuring a small koi pond and lush bamboo groves. The air carried the scent of sandalwood and old books, a fragrance that brought strange peace. Marcus led her to a room on the second floor. It was simply but tastefully furnished with wooden furniture and a large window overlooking the back garden. He pointed to the wardrobe. "There are some new, unworn clothes inside, please use them. The bathroom is over there. Please rest comfortably, don't hesitate." Having said that, he quietly left, giving her complete privacy. Elena stood in the room, feeling its warmth and tranquility. Marcus's thoughtful care, requiring no questions, only highlighted Lucas's coldness and selfishness. A complete stranger showed her such respect, yet her own husband had discarded her like worthless trash. How ridiculous was that? She entered the bathroom. Warm water flowing over her chilled body, though it couldn't warm her frozen heart. She looked at herself in the mirror, pale face, lifeless eyes, colorless lips. This was Elena Sterling, a beautiful title that had also been a cage for 3 years. Grace, the girl with passionate eyes at her embroidery frame, had died long ago. After changing into dry clothes, Elena didn't sleep. She sat by the window, silently watching the rain that had begun to lighten outside. Memories of 3 years of marriage played like a slow motion film in her mind, vivid and painful. She remembered first meeting Lucas. He was like a god stepping out of a novel, arrogant and cold but fatally attractive. She had fallen in love at first sight. To stand beside him, she had constantly worked to learn cooking, flower arranging, how to become the perfect wife. She remembered their wedding day when he told her, "Elena, you just need to be a good Mrs. Sterling at home. I'll handle everything else." At the time, she naively believed it was a promise of protection. She didn't realize it was actually a prison sentence, stripping away all her freedom and dreams. The day she put away her mother's embroidery tools, her heart had ached like being cut. That was her passion, her life. But Lucas had said, "These embroidery things are just time wasters that don't make much money. You don't need to work so hard." He didn't understand, it wasn't about making money. It was her soul. She remembered countless nights alone in the vast mansion, waiting for him to return from social gatherings, always carrying the scent of other women's perfume. He never explained, and she never dared ask. She deceived herself that he was busy, that it was just business socializing. She remembered area appearance. She always appeared looking fragile and pitiful, always needing Lucas by her side. And Lucas always met her every demand while dismissing all emotions from his legal wife. Tonight had been the final straw. He hadn't just hurt her with words but with the cruelest action, pushing her into danger for one fake phone call from that woman. Marcus's warmth tonight was like a light illuminating the harsh truth she had willfully ignored for 3 years. She wasn't loved or valued. In Lucas's eyes, she was probably just a beautiful decoration in his mansion, an unpaid servant, a name on a marriage certificate to appease his family. Her existence was taken for granted to the point where he forgot she was human too, capable of pain and hurt. A soft knock came at the door. It was Marcus. He brought in a cup of hot ginger tea. "Drink some to warm up, it will help you sleep." He set the cup on the table and was about to leave. "Mr. Reed." Elena suddenly spoke, her voice hoarse but determined. "Just call me Marcus." He turned back. "Marcus?" she repeated. "Thank you." This was the first time she had spoken to him completely. "It's nothing." He smiled gently, a warm smile with no ulterior motive. Elena took a deep breath. "Can I stay here for a few days? I'll pay full rent." She didn't want to return to that place, at least not now. Marcus looked deep into her eyes, he seemed to understand everything. "Stay as long as you need. Reed Art Haven always welcomes an artist like Grace. This isn't a hotel, there's no need to discuss money." Having said that, he quietly left, returning silence to her. Elena picked up the ginger tea, its warmth spreading through her palms. She didn't drink it, just silently looked at her shadowy reflection on the tea's surface. She saw a strange woman, a woman who had lost herself for an unworthy love. No, she couldn't continue like this. Grace had to live again. And for Grace to live again, Elena and Lucas's marriage had to end. A clear, decisive resolution formed in her mind. No more hesitation, no more weakness. Her heart had died in tonight's rain, and from those ashes, a cold strength was being reborn. Dawn came after the storm, bringing strangely pure light. Golden sunbeams streamed through the floor to ceiling windows of the mansion, illuminating the cold marble floors but unable to dispel the oppressive, gloomy atmosphere inside. Lucas hadn't slept all night. He sat on the Italian leather sofa, the ashtray beside him overflowing. His usually confident, arrogant face now bore traces of exhaustion and darkness. The anger over the black Bentley still churned in his chest, mixed with a restless anxiety he couldn't define. The house was too quiet, no sounds of breakfast preparation in the kitchen. No familiar aroma of the porridge she usually made when he stayed up late. Her absence suddenly became frighteningly apparent, making every corner of this luxurious mansion feel empty and cold. He had told himself she was just sulking. Surely she would return soon, maybe crying, maybe arguing. And then he would use his dominance to suppress her, returning everything to the old pattern where he always held control. He was used to that script. Just then, the familiar yet grating sound of a car engine came from the gate. Lucas jumped up and hurried to the window. The black Bentley stopped at the main gate. The car door opened, and Marcus stepped out first, then gallantly opened the door for Elena. She no longer wore last night's soaked dress, but a simple white shift dress that made her slender figure look even more ethereal. Her long hair had been dried and fell softly over her shoulders. Rage flared in Lucas's chest. In his eyes, this image was the most blatant provocation. Not only had she gotten into another man's car, but she let him bring her home and was wearing his clothes. Marcus didn't come inside, he just spoke a few words to her, his gaze gentle. Then got back in his car and left. Elena calmly entered the house, the door lock clicking dryly. She looked up to face Lucas standing menacingly in the living room, radiating murderous intent. Her face still showed traces of last night's pallor, but her eyes were terrifyingly calm. Gone was the burning love. The hurt or resentment he was used to, only cold tranquility remained, like a frozen winter lake. This tranquility made Lucas uneasy. He preferred seeing her cry or angry because that proved she still cared about him. But this silence was like complete denial of his existence in her world. He prepared to explode, accusations and insults ready on his tongue. "Elena, you still know the way home. Where have you been all night? Who was that man? Do you have any shame left? His voice was harsh and cutting, each word like a knife blade. But contrary to his expectations, Elena didn't respond at all. She didn't explain. Didn't argue, didn't even bother to glance at him again. She silently walked to the mahogany tea table in the center of the room. She opened her purse and took out a folded document, gently placing it on the table. Lucas narrowed his eyes. What was that? Elena slowly unfolded the document, smoothing it out. Bold black text struck Lucas's eyes, making his brain seem to stop functioning for a moment. Divorce petition. Below, in Party A's signature section, Elena, was signed neatly and decisively. Her handwriting was still beautiful and graceful like herself, but now it carried a cold determination. She looked up, finally meeting his eyes directly, her gaze clear as water without a single ripple. Lucas, let's get divorced. Her voice held no emotion whatsoever. No resentment, no pain. No pleading. It wasn't a suggestion, much less a threat. It was simply a statement of fact, an announcement of something already decided. Lucas's world seemed to collapse in that instant. He stood stunned, all the rage and jealousy ready to explode suddenly choking in his throat. He couldn't believe it. The woman who had always been obedient. Who had always treated him as her entire world. The one he always thought would never dare leave him. Was the very person placing divorce papers before him. He had always thought he held all the power in this marriage, that divorce was his decision to make. But today the situation had completely reversed. Her cruel calmness stripped away all his weapons. Lucas stared at her cold, distant face, then looked down at the clear black and white text on the paper. For the first time in his life, he felt panic, an overwhelming sense of loss and losing control. Thick, heavy silence enveloped the space. Lucas stared at the divorce papers, then looked up at the woman before him who suddenly felt frighteningly strange. It took him a long while to find his voice again. A mocking laugh, dry and full of contempt, burst from his throat. Divorce? Elena? Are you joking with me? He tried to regain his superior demeanor, using words to diminish her decision and pull her back to her original weak position. Just because of some trivial matter last night, you dare make such a scene. Who do you think you are to talk about divorce with me? Having said this, in an uncontrollable rage, Lucas reached out and grabbed the divorce papers from the table. Rip, rip, he tore the document into small pieces and flung them into the air. White paper fragments fluttered down onto the marble floor like dead butterflies. I don't agree. He roared, his eyes bloodshot with fury. You are Lucas's wife, mine your Mrs. Sterling. Don't ever think of escaping me in this lifetime. I won't allow it. He thought this action would frighten her, make her cry and beg. But no, Elena just stood there, silently watching the paper pieces fall at her feet, her expression unchanged. She showed no fear, no anger, no reaction at all. Her calmness was the cruelest whip striking directly at his wounded pride. His power and rage seemed completely ineffective against her. Tearing it up is useless, she said, her voice still steady without a single tremor. I prepared multiple copies. This was just to inform you I'll file directly with the court. She paused briefly, her gaze sweeping over his face contorted with anger. I came back today to pack my things. Having said this, she turned toward the staircase, completely ignoring his existence. Lucas stood frozen in the living room, torn paper scattered at his feet. For the first time in his life, he felt utterly powerless. Everything was slipping from his grasp, and he didn't know how to hold on. He heard her footsteps upstairs, then the sound of dresser drawers opening, the rustle of clothes, each sound like a needle piercing his proud heart. She really wanted to leave. She wasn't joking at all. A moment later, Elena came downstairs, not laden with bags as he had imagined, but with only a small rolling suitcase. Lucas unconsciously glanced at her. She still wore the white dress from when she returned. He suddenly realized she wasn't taking anything he had bought for her. The designer dresses, limited edition handbags, expensive jewelry, all left behind. The only thing she took besides a few everyday clothes was a familiar sandalwood wooden box. Lucas's heart felt struck by a sledgehammer. He knew what was in that box, the embroidery tools her mother had left her, Grace's entire world and soul, the person he had forced her to bury. Her taking it was 1,000 times more painful than her discarding all the designer items he'd bought. It was a steel declaration. She wasn't just leaving Lucas, she was going to find herself again, to find the Grace he had killed. As she wheeled her suitcase toward the door, Lucas's phone suddenly rang, the screen lighting up with "Aria" like a conditioned reflex. He answered. Lucas, how are you? Aria, sweet wheedling voice rang out, sounding strangely jarring in this silent space. Has your wife come home yet? She's not angry anymore, right? Last night I was so worried about you both. Elena was reaching for the door handle when she heard that voice. Her steps paused for a moment, a faint, mocking smile briefly appearing at the corner of her mouth before quickly vanishing. That smile was like a final knife cut, severing the last fragile thread connecting her to this man. She didn't turn around. She opened the door and wheeled her suitcase outside. The brilliant morning sunlight enveloped her figure, as if welcoming a rebirth. The heavy wooden door slowly closed with a clean click. The sound of an ending. Lucas stood motionless in the cold house, torn divorce papers at his feet, Aria's chattering voice still echoing in his ears. "Hello, Lucas, can you hear me?" But he heard nothing more. In his chest, a vast, cold emptiness suddenly appeared, so painful it made breathing difficult. He had lost something he had always considered his, always taken for granted. And now he didn't know how to get it back. After leaving the cold Sterling mansion, Elena didn't look back once. She returned to Reedart Haven, the only place that offered her shelter in her darkest hours. Marcus had arranged everything thoughtfully. He didn't ask about her conversation with Lucas, nor did he delve into her past. He simply gave her respect and absolute space. "There's an empty room on the east side of Reedart Haven with excellent light," he told her the next morning. "I've had it cleaned up. If you don't mind, please use it as your embroidery workshop." Elena followed him to that room. It was separate from the main gallery area, quiet and private. Morning sunlight streamed through the paper windows, casting golden streaks on the wooden floor. In the center was a large wooden work table with an easel beside it. Everything was prepared as if waiting for its owner to return. Elena's heart trembled slightly. For 3 years she had never had a space of her own like this. In the Sterling house, she had a luxurious dressing room and an opulent vanity room, but never a place where she could be herself. "Thank you, Marcus." This time her gratitude was completely sincere. "Don't be formal," he smiled gently. "I'm just an art lover trying to do what I can so a talented artist won't be forgotten." That day, Elena opened the sandalwood box she had brought with her. When the lid opened, the familiar scent of wood and silk thread rose up, making her nose tingle. Inside were neatly arranged colorful silk threads. Silver needles still gleamed brightly, round embroidery hoops with half-finished work. At the bottom were sketchbooks yellowed with age. She gently ran her hand over the familiar tools. This was her world, this was her life. For 3 years she had buried herself alive. Her hand stopped on a piece of pure white silk still half-finished. The image of a pair of mandarin ducks half-embroidered. This was the work she had planned as a first anniversary gift for Lucas. But then, because of his careless comment that embroidery wastes too much time, she had put it away and never touched it again. She looked at the mandarin duck image, then thought of her broken marriage, a painfully ironic feeling. She decisively removed that silk piece from the frame and stored it deep at the bottom of the box. The past was over. The current Grace would no longer embroider such meek, weak things. She took out a piece of pure black silk and stretched it on the largest embroidery frame. She needed no sketches, composition, colors, every stitch and thread were already clear in her mind. She would embroider a phoenix. Not a phoenix from a wedding. Not a symbol of romantic love, but a phoenix bathing in fire, reborn from ashes, more brilliant and proud than ever before. Elena sat by the window, sunlight shining on her hair, her thin shoulders and her slender hands skillfully guiding the needle. She was completely immersed in her own world. No more Lucas, no more Aria. No more Sterling family troubles, just her, needle and thread on black silk. The silver needle in her hand seemed to dance with life on the silk. Golden threads gradually formed the proud phoenix's beak. Blood red threads wove burning plumage. Deep blue threads dotted the eyes that were both sorrowful and defiant. She forgot time, forgot eating. Every stitch carried all the suffering, resentment, and despair she had endured. But it was also strength, hope for a new life. This work wasn't just embroidery, it was her declaration. Elena was dead, Grace had returned. Marcus often stood watching from afar, seeing her absolute concentration. The burning passion in her eyes. Her appearance now was completely different from the despairing woman in the rain that night. Though silent, she now radiated fierce vitality. A beauty of strength that made others unable to look away. He knew the phoenix on the embroidery frame was her. After nearly a week of non-stop work, the piece was finally complete. On the pure black silk, a fire phoenix spread its wings in flight, its entire body blazing in brilliant flames, but its eyes looked toward the light, full of life and indomitability. The embroidery was so lifelike that viewers could feel the fire's heat and hear the phoenix's cry echoing across heaven and earth. Grace named the work Rebirth. Marcus stood speechless before the piece, amazement and admiration clear in his eyes. He spoke no flowery words, just one sentence, "Welcome back, Grace." He didn't organize a grand debut. He quietly had the work framed in precious wood and hung it in the central position of Reed Art Haven's gallery, replacing a famous landscape painting. He put no artist's name, no additional notes. He believed true art would speak for itself, and he was right. A few days later, several renowned collectors and art critics, regular visitors to Reed Art Haven, noticed the new work. First came curiosity, then amazement, finally shock. My God, this double-sided embroidery technique hasn't been seen in ages. Look at the phoenix's spirit, both anguished and proud. The artist who created this must have experienced no ordinary story. This style, this technique, it's very similar to Grace, the rising star who disappeared 3 years ago. Could she have returned? News began spreading quietly but quickly through Shanghai's art circles. An anonymous work called Rebirth at Reed Art Haven was stirring up the still waters. The name Grace, once forgotten, was mentioned again with curiosity and anticipation. The Sterling mansion had never felt so cold and empty. Lucas woke up on the sofa, his head pounding from alcohol and a sleepless night. Morning sunlight streamed harshly into the room. Out of habit, he called hoarsely, "Elena, close the curtains." But only deathly silence answered. He frowned, taking a few seconds to piece together what had happened. She was gone. She had really left. Lucas sat up abruptly, the emptiness in his chest from last night returning even more violently. He looked around the living room. After she left last night, he had angrily smashed several things. Fragments of an antique vase still lay on the floor uncleaned. The house, always neat and spotless under her care, had become messy and cold. Irritated, he went to the kitchen to make coffee, but standing before the complex Italian espresso machine, he was at a loss. Usually each morning, a hot Americano was already waiting on the dining table. He had never had to make it himself. After fumbling around, he finally gave up and just drank plain water. The bland, cold taste matched his mood exactly. Going to the closet, Lucas felt frustrated again. His shirts hung neatly but weren't ironed smooth as usual. He wanted to find his navy blue tie to match today's suit but couldn't locate it among the jumbled ties. Usually each evening, Elena would prepare the next day's clothes for him, from suit and shirt to tie and cufflinks, everything perfectly coordinated. Her care had become like air, taken so for granted that he never noticed its existence. Only today, when that air disappeared, did he feel suffocated. At the office, Lucas carried such negative energy that no one dared approach. Secretary Chen carefully placed coffee on his desk, cautiously asking, "Mr. Sterling, you don't look well. Should I postpone this morning's meeting?" "No need," he snapped, making Secretary Chen jump and quickly retreat. Throughout the important partner meeting, Lucas kept losing focus. Images of Elena wheeling away her suitcase, calmly placing divorce papers on the table, kept spinning in his head. He even misstated several important figures, a basic error that had never happened before. Fortunately, his assistant managed damage control in time. At noon, Aria called, her voice still sweet and caring. "Lucas, are you free for lunch? I'll bring you food, I made it myself." Lucas was irritated and initially planned to refuse. But then thought some company might be better. He agreed. Aria indeed knew how to dress. She wore an elegant office dress with light makeup, looking exactly like a devoted wife visiting her husband. But when she opened the lunchbox, Lucas couldn't help but feel disappointed. Just some salad and sandwiches bought from a convenience store. Compared to the elaborate, nutritious meals Elena used to personally prepare and bring him, it was worlds apart. "Try some." Aria served him a piece of salad, her voice full of expectation. "I can't cook as well as your wife, please don't mind." Lucas reluctantly ate a few bites, suddenly realizing Elena's presence had permeated every aspect of his life. From major to minor matters, she had become an invisible standard no one could replace. That evening, Aria insisted on coming to the mansion to help clean up. Upon entering and seeing the mess, she immediately showed distress. "My God, without your wife, the house has become like this. Let me help you clean up." She began walking around the house, trying to play the hostess role. She attempted to cook dinner but the result was chaos in the kitchen and several burnt dishes. She rearranged some decorative items on shelves, but only disrupted the existing harmony. All her efforts seemed clumsy and awkward, only highlighting Elena's skill and refinement. During dinner, Aria talked non-stop about her career, new roles, jealous colleagues. Lucas just listened silently, unconsciously comparing with dinners with Elena. She rarely spoke about herself, mainly listened to his work stories, occasionally offering insightful comments. Her silence was infinitely more pleasant than this woman's chatter. "Lucas." After dinner, Aria leaned her head on his shoulder, wheedling, "Why don't I move in here with you? I can take care of you conveniently. Seeing you alone like this, I feel so sorry." This statement was the last straw. The thought of another woman sleeping in his and Elena's bed, using her things, replacing her position in this house, suddenly made Lucas feel nauseous. He gently but firmly pushed her away. No need, why not? Aria was surprised. Won't you two divorce eventually? I said no need. Lucas cut her off, his voice visibly cold. This is Elena's and my home. Until we're officially divorced, she's still Mrs. Sterling. Go home. This was the first time he had been so cold to her. Aria was stunned. Tears welling up. You still think about her, she left with another man. That's my business. Lucas stood up, unwilling to say more. It's late. Go home. Aria stamped her feet angrily, crying as she left. After she left, Lucas wandered alone through the empty house. He unconsciously went upstairs and opened their bedroom door. Everything remained the same, but it lacked her presence. He opened her closet. All the dresses, bags, shoes he had bought her remained intact, hanging neatly like mockery. She hadn't taken anything that belonged to him. The only thing she took was that old wooden box containing things he had once considered useless. Only now did Lucas realize she didn't leave for money or material things. She left to find her soul again. The soul he had tried to extinguish. An unprecedented sense of loss overwhelmed him, painful and clear. In the following days, Lucas lived in a state of maddening contradiction. During the day, he threw himself into work, appearing colder and more ruthless than ever, making all Sterling Corporation employees walk on eggshells. But when night came and he returned to the empty mansion, loneliness and loss gnawed at him. Images of Elena leaving in that black Bentley replayed in his mind like torture. Jealousy coiled around his proud heart like a venomous snake. He couldn't accept that his always submissive wife could decisively leave him. And almost immediately, another man had been by her side. In Lucas's mindset, Elena was his possession. Even if he didn't need or value her, others had no right to covet her. The urge to know who that man was, to know how long they had been secretly involved, became stronger than ever. He needed a reason, an excuse to justify his abandonment, to prove he wasn't wrong. She had betrayed him first. In his luxurious CEO office, Lucas called in his trusted assistant. Assistant Wang, help me investigate something. His voice was ice cold. Assistant immediately bowed. Yes, Mr. Sterling, please instruct. Investigate the owner of a black Bentley. License plate XX. Lucas recited the number he had memorized from that rainy night. I want to know everything about this person, background, family connections, social relationships, and most importantly, investigate who he's been in contact with recently. He paused, his eyes darkening. Especially with Elena. Assistant was somewhat surprised to hear Mrs. Sterling's name, but he was smart enough not to ask questions. He just bowed and accepted the task. Yes, Mr. Sterling. I'll have someone do it immediately. With Sterling Corporation's resources and connections, investigating someone wasn't difficult. In less than 2 days, a thick file was neatly placed on Lucas's desk. He opened it. The first page showed the man's photo and information. Marcus Reed, 30 years old. The face in the photo was extremely handsome, but not sharp and domineering like Lucas. Marcus's beauty carried scholarly elegance, deep eyes like containing an entire sky of knowledge. He was an artist, a renowned art collector, owner of Shanghai's most famous private art space, Reed Art Haven. His background was also extraordinary, descendant of an ancient Suzhou family with calligraphy and art traditions. The more Lucas read, the darker his expression became. He had originally thought the man might just be some nouveau rich using money to seduce his knave wife. But no, Marcus not only had money but status and refinement, a figure truly respected by high society. His rival's excellence made the jealousy and sense of defeat in Lucas burn even more fiercely. He turned to the next page, his heart feeling squeezed by an invisible hand. The information was crystal clear. According to investigation, Mrs. Sterling, Elena, after leaving the Sterling house had moved to Reed Art Haven and was still living there. Attached were several photos taken from afar, Elena walking in Reed Art Haven's garden. Marcus stood beside her, both talking about something. Though there were no intimate gestures, the atmosphere around them was harmoniously peaceful. In another photo, she sat by an embroidery frame, sunlight illuminating her focused face, a serene beauty Lucas had never seen. Bang! Lucas slammed his hand on the desk, making the coffee cup beside it splash. All his malicious suspicions seemed confirmed. She was living with him. She had moved in with that man. Rage and humiliation erupted, completely clouding Lucas's reason. He no longer thought that he was the one who had driven her away, leaving her nowhere to go. He didn't consider the possibility that their relationship might be innocent. In his mind now were only 2 words: betrayal. So that's how it is. She had already secured her escape route. Her determined demand for divorce wasn't from hurt, but because she'd found a better refuge. The woman I always thought was gentle and content turned out to be so scheming. Excellent, excellent. Elena, he ground his teeth, his eyes flashing with rage. He felt like a fool being led by the nose. Anger transformed into a mad desire for possession. He had to go there. He had to catch them in the act. He had to drag that shameless woman back to show her the consequences of betraying Lucas. He had to let that Marcus know his woman wasn't something just anyone could touch. Without hesitation, Lucas grabbed his car keys and suit jacket, striding quickly out of the office. His entire being radiated cold murderous intent, making all employees along the way bow their heads in avoidance. He had to go to Reed Art Haven to reclaim his property. The dark blue Maserati screeched to a halt before Reed Art Haven's large gate, creating a jarring sound that shattered the peaceful tranquility of the place. Lucas got out, slamming the door violently. He ignored the surprised security guard and strode straight in, looking fierce like a king inspecting his territory. Reed Art Haven's art space was completely different from Lucas's concrete and steel world. There was no gaudy luxury, only refined elegance. Sandalwood scent wafted through the air, water trickling from the koi pond, bamboo leaves rustling in the wind. All of this seemed extremely offensive to Lucas's eyes now. The place's tranquility seemed to mock his crudeness and vulgarity. Where is Alina? He grabbed a passing staff member, his voice coldly commanding. The employee, frightened by his demeanor, stammered, Sir, who are you looking for? I'm looking for my wife. Call Elena out here. Just then, a calm, steady voice came from behind. Mr. Sterling, what wind has brought you to my Reed Art Haven? Lucas spun around. Marcus stood there, not far away, wearing casual beige linen clothes with rolled-up sleeves, looking relaxed and at ease. His eyes calmly regarded Lucas, showing no fear or anxiety. The contrast in temperament between the two men immediately became apparent, one like raging fire, the other like a calm autumn lake. Seeing his rival appear, the anger in Lucas's heart blazed even more fiercely. He stepped forward, standing face to face with Marcus, his gaze sharp as knives. So it's Mr. Reed. I don't need to know what wind brought me. I just want to ask Mr. Reed one question. Is hiding another man's wife here the action of a gentleman? His words were full of provocation and insult. Marcus showed no anger. He just slightly curved his lips in a bland but weighty smile. Mr. Sterling, you're looking for Alina, but there's only the embroidery artist Grace here. Though gentle, this statement was like a slap across Lucas's face. It wasn't just an answer, it was a denial, denying his right as a husband, denying the name Elena he had imposed on her. It was telling him that the woman he sought no longer existed. Here was only a new person, someone who didn't belong to him. You're lying. Lucas roared, losing all composure. Where is she? You dare secretly carry on behind my back. Today I must get to the bottom of this. Just as tension reached its peak, a clear but cold voice rang out from the embroidery workshop. What's all this commotion? Both men turned around. Elena, or rather Grace, stood at the doorway. She wore a loose white shirt and wide, leg gray linen pants. She still had on an indigo apron, her right hand holding an embroidery needle. Her long hair neatly pinned up to reveal her elegant neck and smooth forehead. She was no longer the glamorous Mrs. Sterling in designer dresses, she was simple and natural, yet radiated a freedom and independence she'd never had before. She looked at Lucas, her eyes clear as autumn water, but holding no surprise, no fear, no love or resentment, only cold distance, as if looking at an uninvited stranger. That gaze pierced straight into Lucas's heart, more painful than any curse. You, he stammered. All the fierce words he'd prepared suddenly choking in his throat. How dare you look at me like that? Come home with me immediately. He tried to grasp at his last shred of authority. Grace slightly frowned as if hearing something utterly ridiculous. Mr. Sterling, you're in the wrong place, she said, her tone calm. This is Reed Art Haven. Not your home. She paused briefly, her gaze sweeping over his face that was pale with anger, then continued with an even more cruel statement. I also have no home to return to with you, Mr. Sterling. These distant words from her mouth were like a knife cutting into his pride. You. Lucas frantically lunged forward, intending to grab her arm. He couldn't accept this reality. He had to drag her back, force her to return to being the obedient Alina of old. But before his hand could touch her, a figure blocked his way. Marcus raised his hand to stop Lucas. He didn't use much force, but the action was extremely resolute. Mr. Sterling, please show some self-respect. Marcus's voice remained calm, but a cold warning flashed in his eyes. Lucas was blocked, looking at the man protecting her, then at her emotionless face. He suddenly felt utterly ridiculous. He had come here to catch them, to assert dominance. but ended up being treated like nothing more than a troublemaker. He wasn't a husband, wasn't someone with rights. Here in her new world, he was just an outsider. Anger, shame, jealousy, and a vague fear of permanent loss intertwined, making Lucas's chest ache. He could do nothing. He couldn't use money or power to threaten Marcus Reed. He certainly couldn't use emotion to bind a woman who had completely grown cold toward him. For the first time in his life, Lucas tasted total defeat. He let his hands drop, stepped back, his eyes still fixed on Grace. Finally, he said nothing more. Just turned and strode out of Reed Art Haven. His steps were somewhat unsteady, like a wounded beast trying to maintain its last bit of pride. Reed Art Haven's tranquility returned, as if silently mocking the storm that had just passed through the loser's heart. Shanghai International Convention Center was brilliantly lit tonight, gathering the city's entire elite. The Shooting Star Night Charity Art Auction was a prestigious annual event where rare treasures were brought out for auction, and where high society displayed their status and charitable hearts. Lucas arrived late. He wasn't truly interested in art. His presence here was purely the social obligation of Sterling Corporation's head. But when scanning the auction catalog, his eyes stopped at one name. Item 130E. Double-sided embroidery, rebirth, artist Grace. Grace, that name pierced his heart like a sharp thorn. After his humiliating defeat at Reed Art Haven, he had locked himself in rage and frustration. He wouldn't allow himself to think of her. But this name once again pulled her into his thoughts provocatively. He found a secluded spot in the corner of the audience, his sharp gaze sweeping around. Then he saw her. Lucas's heart involuntarily skipped a beat. She wasn't Alina, the simple wife in house dresses. She was Grace. She wore an exquisitely tailored jade-colored modern kippah that hugged her graceful curves. Her long hair was pinned high, revealing her snow-white neck and delicate pearl earrings. She wore no heavy makeup, just a light foundation and subtle lipstick, yet radiated an elegant, ethereal beauty that drew every gaze. Standing beside her was none other than Marcus Reed, wearing an elegant gray suit, appearing scholarly and composed. The two stood together without intimate gestures, yet created a blindingly harmonious picture. He was leaning toward her, saying something, and she smiled gently. That smile wasn't the forced, resigned smile he used to see. It was genuinely gentle and peaceful. The image burned through Lucas's chest like fire. The jealousy and possessiveness he'd tried to suppress surged up more fiercely than ever. That woman was his, that smile should belong to him. Just then, the program host on stage raised his voice. Next, please join us in admiring a masterpiece of traditional hand embroidery, a work that has caused quite a stir among collectors recently. Please welcome the Embroidery Rebirth. Stage lights focused, illuminating the work displayed prominently on a stand. The fire phoenix seemed to awaken, stunningly lifelike. Under the lights, each golden and red thread appeared to burn, radiating fierce vitality, both sorrowful and defiant. The entire audience gasped in amazement. Marcus, as the presenter, stepped onto the stage. He spoke no flowery words, simply recounting the story of the nearly lost double-sided embroidery technique, and the artist's devotion poured into the work. The creator of Rebirth, artist Grace, is also here tonight, Marcus said, his gaze gently directed toward her. She hopes this work can bring some warmth, and all auction proceeds will be donated to charity for building schools for children in mountainous regions. All eyes turned to Grace, who simply nodded and smiled slightly, showing no shyness or confusion. Lucas sat in the dark corner, hands clenched into fists. He looked at the work on stage, then at the brilliantly shining woman below. Was this his wife? The woman he'd always thought only knew cooking, cleaning, living dependently on him. How could she create such a soul-stirring work? How could she stand before so many people with such confidence and independence? He realized that in 3 years, he had never truly understood this woman. He had only seen the sterling shell he'd created for her, never knowing that inside that shell was such a precious gem. A gem he had personally discarded. Rebirth had a starting bid of 500,000 yuan. The auction began 600,000, 800,000, 1 million. Paddles were constantly raised. Renowned collectors, art-loving businessmen all wanted this masterpiece. They weren't just buying a work, they were buying a story and rare talent. Grace stood there calmly observing. Her gaze swept across the crowd and suddenly stopped at the dark corner where Lucas sat. Their eyes met in the air. In his were amazement, jealousy, anger, and vague regret. In hers was only calm, no love, no hate, cold indifference, as if looking at a stranger. This very indifference completely enraged Lucas. A mad idea flashed in his mind. He would use the method he was best at, the only way he knew to prove his power. He would buy it. He would buy back her passion, buy back her soul. to show her that no matter how high she flew she could never escape from the palm of his hand. 5 million yuan. A cold, authoritative voice suddenly rang out, drowning out all other bidding voices. The entire auction room immediately fell silent, all eyes turning toward the dark corner. Lucas slowly stood up, stepping into the light. He raised his bidding paddle high, his face showing no emotion, but his eyes burned with possessive fire. Lucas's appearance and the insane price he offered plunged the entire auction room into an eerie silence. Then whispers and murmurs spread like rippling waves. It's Lucas from Sterling Corporation. My God, 5 million yuan for an embroidery piece. Has he gone mad? I've never heard that Mr. Sterling had any interest in art. This is strange. I heard he and that artist Grace have some extraordinary relationship. All those whispers reached Lucas's ears, but he didn't care at all. His eyes were fixed solely on one person on the stage. He wanted to see surprise, confusion, hesitation in her eyes. He wanted her to realize that no matter how hard she tried to escape, she was still under his control. Marcus on stage frowned slightly, looking at Lucas then at Grace. He understood Lucas's intentions clearly. This wasn't an act of art appreciation, this was provocation, a crude act of possession. He raised his paddle. 5,500,000. Lucas smirked coldly. Without hesitation. 7 million. The auction room erupted again. This price had far exceeded the actual value of a contemporary embroidery work, no matter how excellent it might be. Everyone understood, this was no longer an auction but a battle between two men. Marcus looked at Grace, who just quietly shook her head at him, a very gentle shake. She didn't want him to get involved in this meaningless battle because of her. Marcus understood, smiled gently, and slowly lowered his paddle. 10 million. Lucas shouted the final price, an unimaginable number like a declaration of absolute victory. The auctioneer, after a moment of shock, hurriedly struck the gavel. 10 million first time, 10 million second time, 10 million third time. Congratulations to Mr. Sterling for becoming the owner of the masterpiece Rebirth. Applause rang out, but it was more from amazement at Lucas's extravagant spending than congratulations. He stood there amid curious gazes, feeling a brief sense of triumph. He had won. He had used money to crush his opponent, to buy back what belonged to her. He felt he had regained some control. After the auction ended, Lucas went straight to the VP lounge where Grace and Marcus were talking with several other collectors. His appearance immediately made the atmosphere awkward. Everyone tactfully dispersed, leaving just the three of them. Lucas stepped forward, standing before Grace. He didn't look at Marcus, only at her. He held up the auction contract, his voice low and carrying unconcealed arrogance. How about that? The work you poured your heart into? What you call rebirth, didn't it still end up in my hands? He spoke with the tone of a superior bestowing favor. Elena, you should understand one thing, no matter who you become, no matter how high you fly, you will never escape from me. He waited, expecting anger, helplessness, or at least some wavering in her eyes, but once again he was disappointed. Grace looked up at him, her eyes still calm as an autumn lake's surface. She showed no reaction as he expected. She just smiled slightly, a faint, distant and polite smile. Thank you, Mr. Sterling, for your support. Her voice was clear and calm, as if speaking to a business partner, nothing more. This entire 10 million yuan, according to my wishes, will be transferred directly to the Future Seedlings Charity Foundation account to build boarding schools for children in the mountains of Hejiang Province. You have done something very meaningful. She paused, her gaze sweeping over his gradually hardening face, then said one final sentence, gentle words with tremendous destructive power. On behalf of those children, I thank Mr. Sterling for his charitable heart. Pop, Lucas's victory, his arrogance, everything shattered into pieces at that moment. What had she done? She had transformed his domineering act of possession into a noble charitable gesture. She had turned his provocation into support for her ideals. He had spent 10 million yuan not to humiliate her, not to win her back, but to become the biggest sponsor of her charitable work. This humiliation was 1,000 times more painful than being rejected. He used money to prove his power, while she used that same money to elevate herself and reduce him to someone who unconsciously threw money at good causes. The smile on his lips froze, his face turning from pale to ashen. He stood there, still holding the contract, looking like a clown on a magnificent stage. Grace didn't look at him for another second, turning to Marcus with a smile. It's late, let's go home, all right. Marcus nodded, his gaze sweeping over Lucas with no mockery, only a touch of pity. The two walked away side by side, leaving Lucas standing alone and motionless. The feeling of victory disappeared, leaving only emptiness and belated regret beginning to gnaw at his heart. He could buy her artwork with money, But he could never buy back her heart, respect, or even her gaze. The price of regret turned out to be. You are listening to a story on love revenge stories, so expensive. The events at the Shooting Star Night auction quickly became hot topics among Shanghai's upper circles. The name of artist Grace and her work, Rebirth, were mentioned with admiration and acclaim. Meanwhile, Lucas's 10 million yuan gesture was discussed with various hidden implications. Arya naturally wasn't left out of the story. When she read the news online, she was initially extremely pleased. In her eyes, Lucas spending such an enormous sum was precisely to humiliate Elena, to prove that no matter who she became, she was still just a toy in his hands. This made Arya's sense of triumph soar even higher. She felt her position beside Lucas had become increasingly secure. With this happy mood, Arya personally prepared an expensive fruit basket and went straight to Sterling Corporation. She wanted to celebrate the victory with him. Lucas. She entered the CEO's office without knocking, her voice sweet and melodious. I heard the news, you were so magnificent. That 10 million yuan must have really put Elena in her place. She must have looked so pale at that moment. Lucas sat behind his desk, his face dark. He had just signed the transfer of 10 million yuan to the Future Seedlings Charity Foundation under his personal name. Feeling like he had just slapped himself hard in the face. Hearing Arya's voice made his irritation grow even more. What are you doing here? He asked coldly. Arya was slightly taken aback by his attitude, but quickly resumed her coquettish manner. I just came to visit you. Look, I even brought the wine you like most. Let's celebrate a little. She walked around the desk, intending to sit on his lap as usual. Lucas slightly leaned away to avoid her. I'm busy. This small action made the smile on Arya's lips stiffen. She sensed something was wrong, but stubbornly persisted. Busy with what? Elena's situation is clear now, what else are you worried about? She wrapped her arms around his neck from behind, her tone becoming demanding. Lucas, why don't you make our relationship public? Now that she's moved out, everyone knows about what happened at the auction. This is the perfect time. I don't want to keep hiding like this forever. She had been waiting for this day for so long. The day she could rightfully stand beside Lucas and become the next Mrs. Sterling. But Lucas found her voice strangely annoying at this moment. I already said it's not the right time. Why not? Arya lost patience. What are you still waiting for? Are you planning to let that Sterling wife title stand forever? Or do you still miss your ex-wife who cheated on you? Her last words hit exactly on Lucas's wounded pride. Shut up. He suddenly snapped, pushing her hands away forcefully. Who gave you permission to talk about her like that? Arya was pushed back, stumbling several steps. She couldn't believe it. He was defending Elena. Did I say something wrong? Tears began welling up in her eyes. She's living with another man, isn't that cheating on you? You spent 10 million yuan, wasn't it to humiliate and warn her? Why do you look like this now? What exactly are you thinking? Lucas, what I think is none of your business. Lucas stood up abruptly, the fatigue and anger accumulated over days finally exploding. He stared at Arya's crying face, a face he once thought was pitiful and innocent, but now only saw as fake and annoying. Her constant demands, her noise, were completely opposite to Elena's silence and patience from before. An unconscious comparison arose in his mind. Arya, do you know that in 3 years? She never demanded anything from me. Lucas's voice wasn't loud, but it struck Arya's heart like a hammer blow. She never asked me to publicly show affection. She never asked me to buy her expensive things. She never questioned me when I came home late. Lucas continued. The more he spoke, the clearer Elena's image became in his mind. What about you? Look at yourself. Arya was completely stunned. He was comparing her to Elena, and she was the loser. This was the greatest humiliation. What do you mean by that? Her voice trembled with anger and hurt. Are you saying I'm annoying? Have you forgotten? You said you hated her deathly silence. Enough. Lucas cut her off. He felt his head was about to explode. He didn't want to hear anything more. Go home, I want peace and quiet. Lucas's gentle, indulgent mask had finally been completely torn away, revealing a cold, selfish, and impatient person underneath. This was his true nature, the nature that Elena had endured for 3 years. Arya looked at the man before her, feeling like she was looking at a stranger. Fear began to invade her. The perfect man she thought she had in the palm of her hand turned out to be nowhere near as easy to manipulate as she had imagined. The first crack in their false relationship had appeared, deep and irreparable. After the explosive fight with Arya, Lucas had no mind left for work. He left the company but didn't want to return to the empty mansion. His car wandered aimlessly through Shanghai's busy streets, but his heart was a desolate wasteland. He felt lost and adrift, a feeling that someone who had always confidently controlled everything had never experienced before. Finally, he stopped the car in front of the mansion. The place remained the same, luxurious and magnificent, but without any warmth, frighteningly silent. He wandered through the house, from the living room to the bedroom, then down to the kitchen. Everywhere he went, Elena's image appeared. Images of her sitting on the sofa reading, of her busily cooking in the kitchen, of her smiling to greet him home. Those images that once made him feel ordinary, even bored, had now become precious memories he could never touch again. His aimless steps led him to a small room at the end of the second-floor hallway. This was a small study that Elena often used to manage household expenses or sometimes find a quiet corner to read. He rarely entered this room. The room was simply furnished with just a wooden desk, a bookshelf, and a small armchair by the window. Everything was still neat and clean, but covered with a thin layer of dust. He sat down wearily in the chair, looking out the window. He needed something to distract himself, a bottle of wine, a book, anything. He randomly pulled open a drawer of the old wooden desk. Inside wasn't account books but a small, rather old-looking wooden box. It wasn't the sandalwood box she had taken with her. This box looked simpler, more rustic, as if it had been there for a very long time. Curious, Lucas picked up the box. It wasn't locked. He gently opened the lid. The first thing that caught his eye were sketchbooks that had yellowed with age. He flipped through the pages, finding countless embroidery design sketches, brilliant peonies, lively carp leaping over dragon gates, picturesque landscape paintings. The drawings were exquisite, the compositions unique, full of spirit. He even saw the sketch for the mandarin ducks gazing at the moon. Piece that Marcus had mentioned and initial ideas for rebirth. He was stunned. This was the talent he had once bluntly dismissed as useless and time-wasting. It turned out that before becoming Mrs. Sterling, she had been such a brilliantly shining artist. Setting the sketchbooks aside, Lucas saw a small notebook with a dark brown leather cover lying at the bottom of the box, a diary. His proud nature told him he shouldn't invade her privacy. But another urge, a longing to understand, to know why everything had come to this, won out. He needed an answer. His hands trembling, he opened the diary. Her handwriting was beautiful, graceful and gentle. The diary pages weren't written continuously, just brief thoughts recorded on special days. The first page was dated their wedding day. "Today is our wedding day," Lucas said. "You just need to be Mrs. Sterling. That's enough. I've put away my embroidery tools. Perhaps this is the right thing to do. For him I can give up everything." Lucas's heart ached slightly. He turned to another page, dated their first wedding anniversary. "Today is our anniversary. He forgot and went to a social event, coming home late. It's okay, he's busy for our family. I ate the small cake by myself, it was still very sweet." His chest began to feel tight. Another page from a few weeks before that fateful night. "I feel him growing more distant. The perfume scent on his clothes isn't just one type anymore. My heart hurts so much, but what can I do? I can't lose him." And then the final page, the ink still fresh. The date making Lucas feel like lightning had struck him. "Today is our third wedding anniversary. I've booked his favorite restaurant. I hope he'll come home early tonight, just a dinner together would be enough. Lucas, I love you." Their third wedding anniversary. The day he had abandoned her on the highway. The day he had cruelly called her a burden. The day he had rushed to another woman's side was exactly their third wedding anniversary. The day she had carefully prepared for. The day when her only small wish was to have dinner with him. Lucas's mind exploded. He suddenly remembered that night in the car before Aria called. She had hesitantly wanted to tell him something. "Lucas, tonight." But he had impatiently cut her off. "If you have something to say, say it quickly." She had intended to remind him about their anniversary, but his coldness had stopped all the words she wanted to say. All the scattered pieces suddenly connected, forming a cruel truth that exposed his complete selfishness, indifference, and cruelty. Regret was no longer a vague feeling of loss. It became a sharp knife stabbing straight into his heart, twisting deep, painful enough to make him unable to breathe. What had he done? He had trampled on her love, destroyed her faith, and shattered her heart on the very day she treasured most. Lucas collapsed his head onto the desk, clutching the diary with both hands. The composure of a man who always believed nothing could shake him trembled violently for the first time in his life. He hadn't just lost her, he had killed her love with his own indifference. In the luxurious penthouse overlooking the Huangpu River, fragments of an expensive crystal set were scattered across the floor. Aria panted heavily, her hair disheveled, her beautiful face distorted with rage and resentment. She had just smashed everything within reach. Failure. For the first time in her life, she tasted such bitter failure. Lucas, the man she had devoted all her efforts to seduce, the man she thought she had secured in her palm, had bluntly driven her away. He wasn't just cold but had openly compared her to Alina, and ironically, she was the loser. Elena. Alina, why is it always her? Aria screamed, her voice sharp. She grabbed her tablet and every page showed news about Grace. Artist Grace, the rediscovered precious gem of Shanghai's embroidery world. The masterpiece Rebirth and the story of a talent's revival. Marcus Reed. The discerning collector behind Grace's success. Each line, each word of praise was like thousands of needles stabbing into Aria's pride. Not only had Alina not fallen after being abandoned, she was living more brilliantly than ever. She had her own career, people's admiration, and most importantly, the protection of an outstanding man like Marcus Reed. Meanwhile she, a rising star, was being coldly dismissed by Lucas. This comparison drove her mad. She realized that crying and playing pitiful, those tricks no longer worked on Lucas. His heart was gradually leaning toward his ex-wife. If she didn't do something, everything she had worked to build would collapse. No, she couldn't lose. If she couldn't have happiness, then Elena shouldn't expect to live peacefully either. A vicious thought flashed through Aria's mind. She couldn't attack Lucas's feelings, so she would destroy what Alina was most proud of, her career. In the art world, the most frightening thing wasn't lack of talent, but stains on character, plagiarism. Just these two words were enough to destroy an artist at the peak of fame. Aria's eyes flashed with a malicious gleam. She immediately picked up her phone to call her manager. A middle-aged woman named Victoria Lee, famous in the industry for her shrewdness and ruthless methods. Victoria, Aria's voice had calmed but was chillingly cold. I need your help with something. Aria, what's so urgent? Find me an embroidery artist, must be elderly, retired, living in difficult circumstances would be better. Most importantly, their style must have some similarities to that artist Grace. Victoria on the other end paused, smart enough to understand Aria's intentions. What are you planning? This isn't simple. Grace has Marcus backing her now. I don't care. Aria gritted her teeth. I just need a pretext, just need to plant some doubt. Public opinion will do the rest. No matter how capable Marcus is, he can't silence everyone. Money isn't an issue, name your price. Seeing her determined attitude, Victoria stopped advising. All right, I'll handle it. Within just a few days, Victoria had found a perfect target. It was Mrs. Linda Miller, an elderly embroidery artist in a small town near Suzhou. She had some reputation in her youth but retired due to illness. Her current life was quite difficult, needing money for her husband's medical treatment. Her style indeed had some classical elements similar to Grace's school. Aria immediately sent someone with a large sum of money to meet Mrs. Miller, along with a pre-written script. Initially, the old woman hesitated, but faced with the enormous sum that could save her husband's life, her conscience was finally swayed. She agreed to cooperate, providing some of her old sketches. With a witness secured, Aria and Victoria began the next step, fabricating evidence. They hired photo editing experts to deliberately alter details in Mrs. Miller's old sketches to resemble the composition and ideas of Rebirth and several other works by Grace. They also created a touching story about Mrs. Miller once treating Grace like a student, sharing her life's passion only to be brazenly plagiarized. When everything was ready, Victoria contacted a blogger who specialized in writing about art world scandals. Someone famous for being willing to write anything, as long as there was money and it could cause a sensation. One beautiful morning, the bomb was dropped. An article with a sensational headline appeared on an art blog with hundreds of thousands of followers. Reborn Genius or Talent Thief, revealing the truth behind artist Grace's masterpiece Rebirth. The article was written with sympathetic language for the victim, telling Mrs. Miller's story tragically. Accompanying it were comparison images between Mrs. Miller's original sketches and Grace's completed works. The edited photos looked shockingly similar. The article also quoted Mrs. Miller's tearful words. I don't need fame, I just need an apology, recognition for my life's passion. Immediately, the article went viral on social media. Public opinion, always fascinated by stories of deception and celebrity downfalls, quickly joined in. Thousands of critical comments targeted Grace. Unbelievable, looks so noble but has such rotten character. Turns out she's just a thief. No wonder she disappeared for 3 years, probably went looking for ideas to steal. Poor old lady. Return justice to artist Linda Miller. Shanghai's entire art world was shaken. Grace, who had just found her light again, who had just begun rebuilding her life, was suddenly plunged into the abyss of a career, destroying scandal. She was in her embroidery workshop. completely unaware of the vicious storm of slander approaching, ready to devour her. The media storm hit suddenly and fiercely, just like that highway blizzard. When Marcus entered the embroidery workshop with a grave expression, showing Grace the article on his tablet, her world seemed to collapse for the second time. She stared at the screen, the strange face of old Mrs. Miller, the familiar yet unfamiliar sketches, and the vicious slanderous words. Each word was like a knife stabbing into her heart. She didn't know who this old woman was, had never seen those sketches. But the elaborate setup, the malicious comparison images created nearly perfect evidence against her. "No, it wasn't me," she mumbled, her hand holding the embroidery needle trembling, dropping it onto the wooden floor with a cold clink. The familiar feelings of helplessness and injustice flooded back, again the misunderstanding, again the baseless criticism. Her dark past with Lucas made her sensitive and vulnerable. For a moment, she felt like the whole world had once again turned its back on her. Seeing her pale face, Marcus was heartbroken, but he didn't come to comfort her with empty words. He placed his hand on her shoulder, a gentle but firm squeeze. "Grace, look at me." She raised her confused eyes to meet his. "I believe in you." Just 3 simple words, but they had more power than 1,000 speeches. Like warm water slowly flowing into her freezing heart. Not a moment's hesitation, not a single question, only absolute trust. "This is a very sophisticated trap," Marcus continued, his voice calm and rational. "They prepared very carefully, but the more careful they are, the more loopholes there will be. Now isn't the time to fall, we must fight together." Marcus's calmness and faith gave Grace strength. That's right, she was no longer the weak Alina of the past. She was Grace, and she couldn't let others trample on her passion, on the legacy her mother had left her. At the same time, in the CEO's office of Sterling Corporation, Lucas was also reading that article. Assistant stood beside him, not daring to breathe loudly. Lucas skimmed through the article, his face cold as steel, anger rising in his chest. But this time his fury wasn't directed at her. A flash of doubt crossed his mind, could it be possible? Could she really have done such a thing? He had never truly understood her talent, but then the image of the diary, those lines full of passion and pain, came back to him. No, someone like her, someone who treasured embroidery art like life itself, would never do something so despicable. And more importantly, he understood Aria's character. This incident happened right after he had been cold to her. The timing was too perfect to be coincidence. "Assistant," Lucas's voice was so cold it made the listener shiver. "Yes, Mr. Sterling. Investigate this Mrs. Linda Miller immediately. Check all bank accounts, hers and her family's, for the past month. Find out if she's had contact with any strangers recently." He paused, his eyes sharp as knives. "Also investigate the blogger who posted this article. I want to know who paid him." Assistant bowed to accept the order. He knew Mr. Sterling was truly angry, but this anger didn't seem to be about Mrs. Sterling, but about whoever was pulling the strings behind everything. Lucas acted in silence, no one knew he couldn't publicly defend her. His pride and guilt wouldn't allow it. He didn't have that right. The only way he could help was to quietly uncover the truth and restore her innocence. This was the only way of atonement he could think of. While Lucas quietly investigated, Marcus chose a completely different path. He decided to face public opinion directly. That very afternoon, a press conference was held at Reed Art Haven. Dozens of reporters and journalists from major and minor art publications were present, crowding into the exhibition hall. Grace was also present, sitting beside Marcus. Her face still showed some fatigue, but her eyes were incredibly determined. She wasn't hiding. Marcus stood up to face the array of camera lenses, showing no sign of nervousness. "Welcome, journalists, for coming here today," he said with steady composure. "I know everyone is very concerned about the rumors surrounding artist Grace and her work Rebirth. On behalf of Reed Art Haven and myself personally, I can confirm these are completely unfounded slanders." He presented evidence that his team had gathered in just one morning. Grace's original sketches for other works bore unmistakable personal characteristics. Testimonials from longtime silk thread sellers confirmed she had personally selected special threads that only experts knew how to use. Most importantly, he showed a short video footage of Grace sitting and embroidering Rebirth in the workshop, captured by Reed Art Haven's security cameras. The time-lapse video showed the entire process of her creating the phoenix from the first stitches. A process full of creativity and passion. "True art needs no explanation," Marcus said, looking directly into the camera lenses. "Grace's talent is beyond question. Reed Art Haven and I personally will pursue this slander case to the end to protect our artist's honor." He paused, then turned to look at Grace with gentle, trusting eyes. I believe in her unconditionally." His firm declaration echoed throughout the venue. Grace looked at the man beside her, who hadn't hesitated to shield her from the storm. Warmth and infinite gratitude rose in her heart. Two men, one publicly defending her in the light, one quietly investigating in the shadows. Both, in their different ways, were fighting for her. The net of truth was tightening around the mastermind. While Marcus and Grace's press conference was creating waves of conflicting public opinion, in the shadows, Sterling Corporation's investigation machine was operating at maximum speed. Lucas sat in his office, the air around him colder than ice and snow. He didn't read the news, didn't care about the gossip outside. He only waited for the truth. And the truth didn't keep him waiting long. Assistant entered, placing on his desk a file thicker than before, his expression extremely cautious. "Mr. Sterling, we have the investigation results." Lucas said nothing. Just gestured for him to continue. "Just as you predicted," assistant reported, "Mrs. Miller's son's bank account received a large sum of 2 million yuan 3 weeks ago. The money was transferred from an intermediary account, but tracing it back, we determined it originated from Victoria Lee's account, area manager. On the same day, that blogger also received 500,000 yuan from the same intermediary account. Everything was clear as daylight, a conspiracy bought with money." Lucas flipped through the transaction statements, his face showing no emotion, but a close look would reveal his knuckles had turned white from clenching. He had predicted this result, but the confirmation still ignited a smoldering fire of rage in his chest. Area, the woman he had once thought naive and fragile, could use such dirty methods to harm someone who had no intention of competing with her. Anything else? Lucas's voice was hoarse. Assistant hesitated before continuing with an even more uncomfortable expression. "Mr. Sterling, per your request, the technical team checked the cloud backup history from your phone and they found something." He placed a small recording device on the desk. "This is an automatically backed up call recording. The call took place around 10 p.m. on the 15th. Lucas's heart suddenly skipped a beat. That was exactly the fateful night on the highway. His hand trembled as he reached out to press play. The office's silence was broken by painfully familiar sounds. First was Aria's weak, pitiful voice. "Lucas, I'm sorry for bothering you at this hour. I have such a high fever." Then his own cold, impatient voicey, "Stay home, don't go anywhere. I'm coming right over." And then the part of the conversation he hadn't known about, words Aria had spoken when he thought she was just being coquettish. "No need, Lucas. I don't want to trouble you and your wife. She won't be happy, she's never liked me anyway. Don't fight with her because of me. I'd feel so guilty." Each word, when heard again in this context, became unbearably piercing. Every sentence was a provocation. An invisible knife stabbing into his already fractured relationship with Alina. She hadn't just pretended to be pitiful, she was deliberately adding fuel to the fire, turning him into a puppet, a weapon to hurt his own wife. And then the end of the call, after he had hung up, but perhaps the other end hadn't completely disconnected. A very soft, triumphant laugh from Aria made it into the recording, along with a smug mumble. "Elena, let's see if you can keep him this time." "Turn it off," Lucas growled. Assistant quickly turned off the recorder. Silence returned, but now it was 10,000 times more terrifying. Lucas sat motionless, his face no longer showing anger but a terrifying emptiness. The truth was even more cruel than anything he had imagined. It turned out everything was just a play. A perfect play where he was both audience and the most foolish lead actor. He had been manipulated, not just emotionally but his entire being, his intelligence, his pride, all of it had been made a mockery by that woman. He had suspected his wife because of this fake drama. He had abandoned his wife in a stormy night because of these crocodile tears, on their wedding anniversary. He had pushed his own happiness into the abyss because of his selfishness and stupidity. Guilt and self-loathing rose like a tsunami, drowning him. He had been wrong. Wrong from the very beginning. He didn't just owe Alina an apology, he owed her a lifetime. The emptiness in Lucas's eyes gradually disappeared, replaced by a cold, cruel determination. He knew what he had to do. He had to not only restore Elena's innocence but make the one who had directed this play pay the steepest price. "Where is she?" Lucas asked, his voice calm to the point of being chilling. "Mr. Sterling, Miss Aria is currently filming at the studio in the western suburbs." Lucas slowly stood up, taking the evidence file and recorder and putting them in a briefcase. Each of his movements was deliberate and measured, but concealed a storm about to erupt. "Prepare the car." Once Lucas's fury was unleashed, it would burn everything to the ground. The studio in the western suburbs was on break. Aria sat in the chair reserved for the lead actress, in an excellent mood. After several days of public criticism, Marcus's press conference had caused some trouble. But thanks to Victoria's media team, the story was still in a tug of war. Many people still believed the pitiful story of old Mrs. Miller. This made her feel that Grace, even with Marcus backing her, couldn't easily escape. She was smiling as she accepted water from her assistant when suddenly the entire film set became agitated. Everyone turned their attention toward the gate. A familiar dark blue Maserati pulled up sharply. Lucas stepped out of the car. Arya was stunned, then burst with joy. He had come looking for her, surely after several days of anger. He had thought things through and come to make up with her. Her sulking act had worked. She immediately stood up, straightened her dress and hair, then broke into a radiant smile, walking quickly toward him with a voice that was both coquettish and slightly petulant. "Lucas, you finally came to find me. I knew you wouldn't stay angry with me for long." She intended to wrap her arms around him as usual, but Lucas only stepped back coldly, his eyes looking at her like ice, a completely unfamiliar gaze without any warmth, only disgust and contempt to the extreme. Arya's smile froze on her lips. "Lucas? What's wrong?" Lucas didn't answer her. He opened his briefcase, pulled out a file, and threw it directly at her face. Swoosh! Papers flew everywhere, scattering across the ground before dozens of crew members. They were bank statements, irrefutable evidence of money transfers. "What is this?" Arya stammered in panic. "See for yourself." Lucas's voice was cold as hell. "See the play you paid to direct. See how much your fake innocence was worth." Arya looked down at the numbers on the papers, her face immediately drained of all color. She trembled as she stepped back. No, I don't know anything. There must be some mistake." She began her familiar routine tears. "Lucas, you have to believe me. Someone is trying to frame me. It must be Elena. She's jealous of me, so she—" "How dare you mention her name even now?" Lucas cut her off, his voice grinding through his teeth. He pulled out the recorder and pressed play. Sound from the recorder echoed throughout the film set. Arya's fake weak voice, Lucas's impatient tone. And finally, the triumphant laugh and malicious words. "Elena, let's see if you can keep him this time." All surrounding sounds fell silent. Everyone present, from directors and actors to crew members, was stunned. The beautiful, pure, saintly face of goddess Arya that they had always admired had completely collapsed. Behind that facade was a person with such malicious and terrifying schemes. Arya stood frozen, her whole body trembling violently. Why did he have this recording? All her escape routes had been cut off, she had lost miserably. "No, it's not like that." She shook her head frantically, tears streaming down. But this time no one believed her anymore. Lucas stepped forward, standing right in front of her. He looked straight into her panicked eyes, his disgust unconcealed. "You didn't just deceive me," he said, his voice hissing through his teeth. "You turned me into a clown, a weapon to hurt my woman. I'll settle this debt with you, principal and interest." Slap, a thunderous slap. Lucas used all his strength to slap her crying face. The sound rang out harsh and merciless. Arya fell sprawling to the ground, one side of her face immediately swelling red, bearing the clear imprint of 5 fingers. The entire film set fell dead silent. "This slap," Lucas said, his voice cold as ice, "is me returning your deception on behalf of Elena." He leaned down, whispering in her ear, his voice low but clear enough for her to hear every word. "From today, Arya, your career in the entertainment industry is over." Having said that, he straightened up, adjusting his vest collar as if he had just touched something filthy. He didn't spare her another glance, turning and striding to his car. Arya sat collapsed on the ground, clutching her swollen cheek, completely broken. She looked up to see only the cold, merciless back of the man who had once promised to protect her. Around her were the contemptuous looks and pointing fingers of colleagues. Everything was over. Career, love, reputation, all had turned to smoke in just one act. The plagiarism scandal was extinguished as quickly as it had erupted. The entire truth was exposed in newspapers the very next morning. The call recording, money transfer evidence, Mrs. Linda Miller's confession after being summoned by police, everything painted a complete picture of a dirty conspiracy. Arya immediately became the focus of criticism, abandoned by audiences and brands alike. The career she had devoted all her efforts to building collapsed in a single night. Grace received this news calmly. Her innocence was restored, but she felt no joy of victory in her heart. She only felt tired. The storm had passed and Reed Art Haven returned to its inherent tranquility. She sat by her embroidery frame. But this time her mind couldn't concentrate at all. Images of Lucas appearing at the film set, the thunderous slap, and his cold declaration of banishment kept swirling in her head. Had he done it for her? Or was it just the wounded pride of a man who had been deceived? She didn't know and didn't want to know. Everything related to him no longer mattered. Just then, familiar but heavy footsteps echoed outside the embroidery workshop door. Grace looked up to see Lucas standing there. He no longer had the arrogant, imposing demeanor of before. His expensive suit was somewhat wrinkled, his handsome face gaunt, with dark circles under his eyes from exhaustion. He stood only at the doorway without entering, his complex gaze fixed on her, a look full of torment, guilt, and a vulnerability she had never seen in him before. Grace set down her embroidery frame. She wasn't surprised or afraid, just quietly waiting to see what he wanted to do. The silence stretched to suffocating lengths, as if Lucas was using all his strength just to speak. He began, his voice hoarse and strained. I came to apologize. Grace didn't respond, just quietly looked at him. Seeing no reaction from her, Lucas stepped inside. Each step seeming weighted with lead. He stopped in front of her, at just the right distance to not make her feel invaded. For the first time in his life, the high and mighty CEO bowed his head before a woman, a genuinely sincere bow. Elena, I'm sorry. He looked up straight into her eyes. I've read your diary, it's all my fault. I'm sorry for forgetting our anniversary. I'm sorry for not trusting you. I'm sorry for my indifference and selfishness over these 3 years. His voice choked. And I'm sorry for leaving you on that highway that night. Each apology he spoke with difficulty, as if using a knife to cut into his own heart. He wasn't begging for forgiveness, he was simply confessing his sins. Grace listened calmly. If these words had come a month ago, they might have been enough to make her burst into tears. Enough to soften her heart and forgive everything. She had once longed to hear these words so much, but now when she heard them, her heart remained flat as a lake without ripples. She gently stood up, walked to the tea set, and poured herself a cup. The faint fragrance of chrysanthemum tea helped her feel calmer. Lucas. She spoke, her voice clear but carrying an invisible distance. Do you know, wounds on flesh, no matter how deep, will eventually heal, at most leaving a scar. But there are scars that aren't on flesh but in the heart. She turned to look at him, her clear eyes without a trace of resentment. I heard your apology, but it cannot heal those scars. It cannot make time go back to that rainy night. It also cannot erase the 3 years of youth I wasted waiting for someone who never looked back. She set the teacup down on the table. Everything is too late now. This wasn't a reproach or an angry rejection, it was simply a fact, a calmly cruel truth. It was like telling someone the sun had set and nothing could make it rise again immediately. Lucas was stunned. He had prepared for anger, curses, even a slap from her. He could have faced all of that, but he couldn't face this calmness. The calmness of someone who had completely let go. The helplessness and despair that hit him was even more intense than when he learned he had been deceived by Arya. He realized there were things that once lost, no amount of money, power, or apologies could ever recover. Elena, He wanted to say something more to hold on, but his throat seemed blocked. Mr. Sterling, if there's nothing else, please leave, Grace said, her tone still polite but carrying dismissal. I still have work to do. She turned back to pick up her embroidery frame, her hands still steady. The silver needle beginning to dance on the silk again, as if the man standing behind her was just air. Lucas stood there looking at her slender but determined figure. He understood that the door to her heart had truly closed. He had shut it himself, and now he could never open it again. Grace's cold rejection didn't make Lucas collapse, on the contrary, it awakened an unprecedented persistence and stubbornness in him. He understood that empty apologies no longer worked. He had made too many mistakes, hurt her too deeply. Now he had to use actions to prove his repentance. He had to learn how to love someone again, learn how to pursue back the very wife he had once discarded. But the problem was that Lucas, a CEO accustomed to being pursued and obeyed by others, had no idea how to do this. And so his journey to win back his ex-wife began with a series of extremely clumsy and awkward actions. The next morning a luxurious Maybach parked outside Reed Art Haven's gate. Lucas, dressed in an impeccable suit, personally carried a breakfast basket prepared by the city's most famous 5-star restaurant. He thought women all liked expensive and romantic things. When Grace stepped out the gate for her morning walk, she encountered this scene. She stared at him in surprise. Breakfast for you. Lucas offered the basket to her, looking somewhat unnatural. I didn't know what you liked to eat, so I bought a little of everything. The basket contained caviar, foie gras pâté, French croissants, foods completely inappropriate for breakfast. Grace looked at the food, then at him. She simply said quietly, "Thank you, Mr. Sterling. But in the morning I only eat plain porridge and pickled vegetables." Having said that, she walked past him to continue her stroll. Lucas stood frozen in place, still holding the expensive breakfast, looking utterly lost. Only now did he realize that after 3 years of marriage, he didn't even know his wife's simplest eating preferences. The first failure didn't discourage him, he switched to a second strategy: waiting. Every afternoon after work, his Maserati would park at a corner across from Art Haven. He didn't go inside, just sat in the car, silently watching toward her embroidery workshop, waiting until the lights in the room went out and she left for home. He thought this was an act of silent care and protection. But this behavior brought Grace considerable trouble. The appearance of the familiar luxury car and the famous Sterling Corporation CEO quickly attracted attention from those around. Rumors began to spread. Sterling is trying to win back his ex-wife. Artist Grace and Mr. Sterling are about to reconcile. This made her feel extremely pressured and uncomfortable. One afternoon, Marcus personally went out. He tapped gently on Lucas's car window. "Mr. Sterling, could we talk for a moment?" The two men stood facing each other by the roadside. Marcus maintained his elegant, polite demeanor. "Mr. Sterling, I know what you're trying to do, but your methods are only causing more trouble for Grace. She needs a peaceful life. My business with her doesn't require Mr. Reed's concern." Lucas replied coldly, "It is indeed a matter between two people." Marcus remained unshaken. "But Grace is currently an artist at Art Haven. I have a responsibility to protect her privacy and tranquility. If you truly want to make amends to her, please use another way, one that doesn't put her in a difficult position." Marcus's words were like cold water, making Lucas realize the selfishness in his actions. He had only thought about showing himself without considering her feelings at all. After that, he no longer waited publicly. He began using his strengths, power, and business acumen. He quietly investigated Grace's embroidery workshop. He learned she was having difficulty finding a supplier for ancient silk threads, an important material for her next work. The supply of this type of thread was very rare, almost monopolized by a large textile company. Without a word, Lucas used his connections, applying pressure to make that company agree to supply those threads to Art Haven at a favorable price. A few days later, Grace received news from the supplier. She was extremely surprised and delighted. Marcus saw the joy in her eyes and smiled too, but had a suspicion in his heart. He knew accomplishing this wouldn't be simple. Grace probably had some idea too, but she said nothing. She didn't thank anyone, but didn't refuse the silent help either. For the first time his action didn't make her feel troubled or pressured, it truly touched what she needed most. Lucas sat in his office, looking at the report about the successful delivery of silk threads, complex feelings rising in his heart. He received no thanks, no glance. But being able to help her solve difficulties and see her career develop brought him a strange satisfaction. A feeling more joyful than signing a $1 billion contract. He realized that pursuing someone wasn't about using expensive things to show off, but quietly doing what that person truly needed. This path would be long and difficult, but at least he had found the right direction. Art Haven at night returned to its inherent tranquil atmosphere. Pale moonlight filtered through bamboo leaves, casting shimmering streaks of light onto the koi pond where colorful fish swam leisurely. The air carried the sweet, pure fragrance of late blooming osmanthus flowers. After dinner, Grace and Marcus strolled together in the small garden. It had been so long since she'd had such peaceful moments. No more worries, no more conspiracies and struggles. The slander scandal had passed, the masterminds had paid their price. Her life seemed to be gradually entering a new trajectory, peaceful and full of hope. "How is your new work progressing?" Marcus broke the silence, his deep, warm voice blending into the night's tranquil space. "Almost finished," Grace replied, a gentle smile blooming on her lips. "Fortunately, you helped find that silk thread supplier." She spoke casually, but both understood that the person who had really helped her wasn't him. Marcus stopped by the pond, his eyes looking down at the rippling water, but his words directed toward her. "It seems Mr. Sterling is truly trying to change," he said straightforwardly, without any jealousy or mockery. He was simply stating a fact that both he and she had noticed. He respected her and believed she was smart enough to judge everything herself. Grace fell silent, her hand unconsciously clenching slightly. That's right, she wasn't unaware. Lucas's clumsy but sincere recent actions had more than once caused cracks to appear in the wall of ice in her heart. She tried to ignore it, tried to appear cold, but the heart didn't always obey reason. The wavering, however small, still existed. Seeing her silence, Marcus turned to look at her, his deep eyes under the moonlight becoming more gentle and sincere than ever. He knew if he didn't speak now, he might never have another chance. "Grace," he called her name. "No." he corrected himself. Elena. His sudden use of her old name surprised Grace into looking up. This name was tied to a painful past, tied to the weak person she had tried to bury. But when it came from Marcus's mouth, it carried no harshness but instead contained acceptance. A complete acceptance of who she was, including her past. I cannot erase your painful past. The future Lucas might give you could be the ultimate luxury that I could never match. Marcus said, his voice sincere and earnest. But Elena, I can give you something you might need most. He stepped closer, close enough for her to see her own reflection in his deep eyes. I can give you respect, understanding, a quiet space where you can be Grace, be yourself, without having to read anyone's expressions. I can give you a home where your art and soul always come first. He paused, took a deep breath, then spoke the words he had buried in his heart for so long. Words that weren't a grand promise but a simple, warm proposal. Elena, let me take care of you. The world around Grace seemed to freeze. Marcus's confession wasn't passionate or domineering. It was like a warm stream gently flowing into her parched heart, bringing comfort and peace she had never known. She was completely stunned. She was grateful to him, respected him, and perhaps in her heart she already had special feelings for him. He was the one who had pulled her out of the swamp of despair, who had helped her find herself again. A peaceful future beside this man, it was such a beautiful, attractive prospect. But images of Lucas with his tormented eyes, his clumsy attempts at redemption, suddenly flashed in her mind. The scar in her heart, though no longer bleeding, still ached whenever the wind changed. She stood at a crossroads. On one side was Marcus, representing a warm present and peaceful future. On the other side was Lucas, representing a painful past but one trying with all his might to make amends. How could she choose? Marcus, She was confused, not knowing what to say. Her eyes showed difficulty and some confusion. I need time. Marcus saw the wavering in her eyes. He didn't pressure her, just smiled gently. It's okay, I can wait. Just know that there's always someone here waiting for you. He stepped back, giving her space. But his confession was like a stone thrown into a still lake, creating ripples that continued spreading in Grace's heart, making it impossible for her to calm down. The Shanghai Contemporary Art Exhibition Center was in its final days of preparation for one of the year's biggest events. Grace, as one of the invited participating artists, was personally supervising the installation of her new work. This was a giant embroidered screen depicting hundreds of birds paying homage to the phoenix, exquisite and magnificent in every detail, the culmination of months of her passion. Marcus was also there, standing quietly beside her, occasionally offering suggestions about lighting and positioning. His presence made Grace feel more at ease. However, her heart was still troubled by his confession from a few days earlier. She tried to push all thoughts aside and focus completely on her work. Just then, an unwelcome appearance shattered the peaceful atmosphere. Lucas, in an elegant suit, strode into the exhibition area. His presence immediately attracted everyone's attention. He ignored everything else, walking straight toward Grace. I heard you have a new work, he said, trying to appear calm. But his eyes couldn't hide the complexity when seeing her and Marcus standing together. His sudden appearance made Grace extremely uncomfortable. She didn't want to get entangled with him, especially not in such a public place. Thank you for your concern, Mr. Sterling. She replied coldly, her tone distant. But we're working here, it's not convenient to receive visitors. Lucas seemed not to hear her rejection. His eyes were fixed on the magnificent screen. He could see the confidence, pride and free spirit in this work. It was completely different from what he had known about her. Regret and a sense of loss rose again in his heart. Elena, could we? He was about to say something more when a sharp creaking sound from above cut him off. Everyone reflexively looked up. A large lighting rig suspended on a metal scaffolding system was being moved by workers above. For some reason, one of the fixing bolts had come loose. The entire heavy scaffolding suddenly lost balance, tilted, and came crashing down toward where Grace was standing. Everything happened too fast, in just a blink of an eye. Grace! Marcus shouted, rushing toward her, but he was several steps away and couldn't reach her in time. Grace was frozen, her whole body rigid. She could only open her eyes wide, watching the huge metal mass hurtling toward her, her mind completely blank. In that life and death moment, when all thoughts stopped, a dark shadow shot forward like lightning. Elena! Lucas roared, without hesitation, without a second's thought. All arrogance, regret, calculation vanished, only the most primitive instinct remained. The instinct to protect the woman he loved. He lunged forward, using all his strength to push Grace out of danger. At the same time, the heavy scaffolding came crashing down. Crash. A terrifying sound echoed throughout the exhibition hall. Grace was pushed safely to the ground, but when she turned back, a horrifying scene met her eyes. Lucas lay there, part of his back and left arm pinned under the scaffolding, fresh blood beginning to seep out, staining a large area of his white shirt red. My God. Call an ambulance quickly. Panicked screams rang out everywhere. Marcus and staff rushed over, trying to lift the scaffolding. Grace scrambled up, her whole body trembling, staggering to his side. She knelt down, looking at his face pale with pain, sweat pouring out like rain. Lucas, how are you? Her voice was hoarse, filled with fear she didn't even recognize in herself. Lucas struggled to open his eyes, looking at her. His deep eyes no longer held coldness or possessiveness, only concern and infinite tenderness. He tried to smile, but it only made his face more pained. Elena, he whispered, his breath weak. Are you hurt? His only question at this moment was about her safety. Grace's tears could no longer be held back, streaming down her face. The wall of ice she had tried so hard to build for so long completely collapsed at this moment. His instinctive sacrifice, his final words of concern before losing consciousness, dealt a powerful blow to the deepest part of her heart. The sound of ambulance sirens approached from afar, growing closer and tearing through the air, but Grace heard nothing. She only stared at the man lying in a pool of blood, the most complex emotions rising up and overwhelming her. It was shock, fear, and a painful thread of feelings she thought had died long ago, now suddenly reviving. The air in the VIP room of Shanghai International Hospital was so quiet you could hear the ticking of the wall clock and the steady beeping of heart-monitoring machines. The faint smell of disinfectant mixed with the pure fragrance of a vase of white orchids placed in the corner. Everything was clean and high-end, but couldn't dispel the heavy, cold feeling. Lucas had awakened after the long surgery. His left arm was broken and had to be set in a cast and sling. His back had been pierced by a metal beam, fortunately not hitting his spine, but leaving a deep wound and many serious bruises. He lay on the bed, his usually commanding handsome face now pale, lips dry and cracked, looking unusually weak and fragile. Grace sat in the chair beside the hospital bed, carefully peeling an apple with a small knife. The thin, even apple peels fell onto the plate without breaking. Her movements were extremely skilled and focused, as if performing a work of art. She had been here for 2 days and nights straight. Since he was wheeled into the emergency room, she hadn't left for a moment. Marcus had come to visit. He stood at the door watching her intently peel the apple, then looked at the man sleeping on the bed. He didn't say much, just quietly left a fruit basket. Before leaving, he said to her, Elena, listen to your heart. Whatever you decide, I will always respect it. She understood his meaning. His confession was still there, a promise of a peaceful future, but now her heart was in turmoil. Lucas stirred slightly, his eyelashes trembling before slowly opening. His eyes were somewhat dreamy at first, then gradually focused, settling on her profile. He saw the fatigue in her eyes, the faint dark circles under them, and his heart ached. Elena, he spoke, his dry throat making his voice hoarse. Grace's apple peeling hand paused. She looked up to meet his gaze. Their eyes met in the quiet space, and there seemed to be an invisible current passing between them. You're awake. She set down the apple, her voice calm but no longer cold as before. Do you want some water? She carefully helped him sit up, placing a soft pillow behind his back, then brought a warm glass of water with a straw to his lips. Lucas obediently took a few sips, his eyes never leaving her. How long had it been since he'd had this familiar gentle care? Rather, how long had it been since he'd known to treasure it? Why are you here? He asked, his voice still weak. Where's Marcus? He knew that man was the one qualified to be by her side now. He had something to do and left. Grace replied evasively. You were hurt saving me. It's right that I stay to take care of you. Just because it's right. Lucas smiled bitterly, a smile that made the wound on his back twinge. Grace didn't answer. She cut the peeled apple into small pieces, stuck a silver fork in one, and offered it to him. Lucas didn't take it. He looked deep into her eyes, his gaze gradually becoming sincere. Elena, could we talk for a bit? Not as Mr. Sterling but as Lucas. Your husband. The word husband, coming from his mouth, now carried the weight of 1,000 pounds. Grace trembled slightly, but she didn't refuse. She set down the apple plate, sat up straight, and listened silently. I've read that diary, he began with difficulty. I know everything now. I know that night was our anniversary. I know you were waiting for me. Each word he spoke was like a hammer striking the wall of ice in her heart. I have no words to justify my stupidity, he continued, his voice full of self-reproach. I had become so used to your existence, your sacrifices, that I took them for granted. I was arrogant and selfish, never truly trying to understand you. I was blinded by Aria's deception, but that's not the reason. The biggest mistake was mine. I didn't treasure the treasure I had. He reached out his uninjured hand, wanting to hold hers, but then hesitantly pulled back. I killed Grace, turned you into an empty Mrs. Sterling. And then I heartlessly threw away even that Mrs. Sterling. I don't deserve your forgiveness. Grace listened silently, tears beginning to flow. But she wasn't crying for him, nor from being moved. She cried for herself, for the Elena of 3 years ago who had loved so foolishly, waited so naively. These words, she spoke, her voice choked. The Elena of the past waited so long to hear. Lucas closed his eyes, a hot tear rolling down his temple. I know it's too late, but Elena, I'm not begging for your forgiveness. I'm only begging for a chance to make amends, a chance to learn how to love you again, to love both Elena and Grace. Is that possible? The most honest and deep conversation between them finally took place. No more misunderstandings, no more hiding, just a man confessing his sins and a woman facing the scars of her past. Grace didn't answer. She just reached up and gently wiped away the tear on his cheek. A very light touch, but it made Lucas's entire body tremble. Forgiveness might not be a decision but a process, and that process seemed to have begun to kindle in this quiet hospital room. A month later, Lucas was discharged. The wound on his back had healed but left a long scar. His arm had been freed from the cast but still needed more time for physical therapy. These scars would perhaps become a permanent reminder of the mistakes he had made. Throughout that month, Grace had always been by his side caring for him. She wasn't overly intimate, nor too distant. She fulfilled the duties of a family member. Their relationship existed in a suspended, fragile state, neither daring to speak up and break it. The divorce papers still lay at the lawyer's office, neither withdrawn nor processed. On the day he was discharged, she had packed her things, intending to return to Reed Art Haven, but Lucas stopped her. Could you come with me somewhere? He asked, his tone not commanding but pleading. His eyes looked at her urgently. After some hesitation, Grace nodded. He personally drove not the sporty Maserati anymore, but a steady black Bentley sedan. Ironically, it was the same color as Marcus's car. Perhaps this was also a change in his temperament. The car rolled smoothly. Grace looked out the window, not asking where he was taking her. But when the car turned onto the road leading to G15 highway, her heart involuntarily beat faster. She knew where he was taking her. This road had once been her nightmare, but today there was no storm, the sky was clear blue, the sun golden and brilliant, the scenery on both sides passing peacefully. Everything was different except the road itself. Lucas drove very slowly, silent, concentration clear on his face. Finally, he stopped the car in the emergency lane. Right here, where months ago he had cruelly forced her out of the car in the middle of a stormy night. Grace unconsciously clenched her hands. The painful memories flooded back, but this time there was no panic or despair, only a melancholy sadness. Lucas said nothing. He unbuckled his seatbelt, opened his car door, and walked around to the back. He went to the passenger door and opened it for her, a gentlemanly act he had never done in 3 years of marriage. He extended his hand toward her, palm up, a large, steady hand that bore a few new scars. Elena, get out of the car, his voice was deep and gentle. Grace looked at his outstretched hand, then into his deep eyes full of waiting and some anxiety. She hesitated for a moment, then slowly placed her hand in his palm. He grasped her hand firmly, a warm, secure grip, then gently helped her out of the car. They stood by the highway where cars still sped past. Wind blew gently, stirring her hair. Lucas still held her hand tightly, not letting go. He looked straight into her eyes, his gaze sincere and earnest to the extreme. Elena, I brought you back here not to reopen your wounds, he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. I just wanted to stand at the very place where I made the biggest mistake of my life to tell you one thing. He took a deep breath. Give me a chance to personally bring you home, to start over from the beginning. Is that possible? His words weren't a grand promise, they were a humble plea. A beginning from the very place where things had ended. Grace's tears began to well up. She looked at the man before her, the one who had once caused her pain unto death, but who had also unhesitatingly used his body to protect her. She saw true repentance in his eyes, saw the change in his character. The wall of ice in her heart had long since shattered. The scars might never disappear, but perhaps she had enough courage to face them, to give the past a chance to heal. She didn't immediately answer. She didn't say yes, but she didn't pull her hand away either. She just gradually tightened her grip, responding to his clasp. A gentle squeeze that contained tolerance, hope, and a promise for an unwritten future. Their future still lay ahead, full of challenges. But this time they wouldn't be alone anymore. They would walk that road together. Starting again from the very place where they had once fallen. The golden sunset light shone on the two figures standing together, their shadows stretching long across the pavement like a new beginning being drawn. Never take love for granted. Lucas lost Alina because he treated her sacrifices as entitlements rather than gifts. When we stop appreciating what we have, life teaches us painful lessons by removing it. Preserve your authentic self in relationships. Elena's mistake was abandoning her identity to become the perfect wife. True love should nurture who you are, not require you to disappear. Actions speak louder than apologies. Lucas couldn't win Alina back with words or money alone. He had to demonstrate genuine change through his willingness to protect her and respect her boundaries. Real redemption requires transformed behavior, not just remorse.